The flames began to die down, and Andre added a few branches to keep them from getting too hot, but still keeping them alive. The heat from the fire grew stronger, making him feel a little drowsy. He decided to leave the cave for a short walk and recharge his batteries. But suddenly a cold breeze blew in, and the scientist lost the will to stray far from the fire. Another 20 minutes passed, but to Kuznetsov it felt like an hour had passed. Andre stood in the forest in complete darkness. A large owl swooped over him and settled softly on a pine branch. Above, a vast, unrealistically starry sky stretched out, as if he were in a giant planetarium. The scientist looked at the stars in disbelief, his brief encounter with the hunters forever imprinted on his memory. The boy quickly moved forward, hurrying to return to the cave where his friends were sleeping. Kuznetsov was afraid someone would wake up and accuse him of leaving the camp unattended. The fire burned steadily and brightly, almost too brightly. The light from the fire was incredibly captivating in the midst of the dark forest. Andre peered into the cave, but it was empty. Unbelieving his eyes, the scientist stepped inside, but his friends were gone. Only the crushed branches on the floor remained as a reminder of their overnight stay. Kuznetsov felt fear touch his back with its cold fingers. Goosebumps ran across his skin, sending a nervous shudder down his knees. But then he realized they were playing a prank on him, punishing him for being off duty for so long. He turned, took a few steps toward the exit, and spotted a dark figure near the fire. The man sat with his back to him, wearing a wide jacket with a hood over his head. Kuznetsov thought he saw smoke coming from the stranger. Andre looked around. There was no sawed-off shotgun or other weapon nearby. The backpacks and other belongings were also missing. The grim figure by the fire, meanwhile, stirred slightly and turned halfway, as if waiting for Kuznetsov to approach. But the scientist still couldn't make out the stranger's face, or even tell whether it was a man or a woman. "Hey, who are you?" Andre finally managed to say awkwardly, as if apologizing. A smirk came from beneath the stranger's hood, and his shoulders shook slightly, as if with silent laughter. But there was no response. Kuznetsov clenched his fists, walked around the intruder, peered into his face, and recoiled in horror. Albert Borisovich sat pensively on a log in front of the fire. The professor was enthusiastically poking a branch into the flames, causing the embers to shoot up fountains of red sparks. Kuznetsov wanted to run, to disappear into the dark forest, but his feet felt rooted to the ground. "Sit down," Kaimovich said coldly. Despite the heat of the fire, Andre felt a chill wafting off the professor. The boy caught himself sitting down on the log, though he couldn't remember doing so. Albert Borisovich was muttering something under his breath and, without looking up, continued to stir the wood in the fire with a stick. He was breathing heavily and wearing strange clothing that resembled a prisoner's uniform. "Where is everyone?" Andre said, breaking the oppressive silence with difficulty. "Everyone is alive and well," Kaimovich answered calmly, and again quietly muttered something unintelligible. Kuznetsov was about to ask, "You too?" But he held back. He felt uneasy, recalling Albert Borisovich tied up in the kitchen, then the burning house. And now he understood why the professor was emitting that strange smoke. He looked longingly into the dark forest. "You want to run away? And you think you can run away from the virus too?" Kaimovich stared into the fire, ignoring his interlocutor. "We have a vaccine. The immunity works. Even after a bite, the virus is no longer dangerous. I'm happy for you. Well, what will your children be like?" The image of pregnant Katya appeared before Andrei's eyes. Then the silhouette of a baby wrapped in a swaddling cloth. The young father peels back the edge of the cloth to look at the child, but immediately turns away. Instead, a small, vicious creature with gray, ulcerated skin, sunken eyes, and a pointed nose stares back at him. A tiny zombie with a toothless mouth screeches and demands a bloody meal. The terrifying vision vanished as quickly as it had appeared. Kuznetsov again realized he was sitting across from the professor. Albert Borisovich wasn't looking at him, but he was smiling at something, as if reading all the fears of his former assistant. So, children don't inherit immunity from their mothers? Andrei finally asked, his teeth chattering from the cold. Who knows, who knows? You're a scientist after all, and you should understand that to test a theory you need experiments, tests. So are you willing to experiment on your children? The fear inside gave way to anger, and Kuznetsov answered with hatred. What difference does it make to you? You're dead. You're a corpse. You don't care. Who knows, who knows? Everything is relative. Many mysteries still remain unsolved. If not for your intrusion, I would have conducted many experiments and found the answers to all the questions. You've already performed your most important experiment. The planet is contaminated. Everything is over. And it's all because of you. A meteor flashed across the sky, leaving a bright, glowing trail behind it for a moment. But none of the interlocutors noticed. Kaimovich shook his head in disappointment. Don't confuse soft with warm. It's not the planet that's infected, but humanity. The planet is actually fine now. It's cleansed. You need to become smarter, my friend. I had high hopes for you, but you've let me down. You know too little about the virus. I'm disappointed in you, Andrei. The epidemic will end sooner or later. The virus will die, and over time, everything will return to normal. Well, you're naively optimistic, my dim-witted student. This has never happened before the Nova. It's unique. Who do you think will die first? The virus or the last human? We've already encountered people who don't need the vaccine. The virus isn't perfect. It can't infect everyone, Kuznetsov retorted defiantly. The professor sighed heavily, as if he was very upset. You're such a moron. Humanity has no future without an antiviral. I entrusted you with the vaccine, but it seems I made the wrong choice. With a moron like you, the human race is doomed to extinction. Andrei, you understand yourself. You don't have the brains to make a cure. And why didn't I fire you from the lab sooner? All you were good for was following my commands like a dog and clinging to Masha. Kuznetsov heard a malicious laugh, and the smoke around Albert Borisovich grew thicker, seeming to burst into flames. Andrei became enraged, jumped up, swung, and attempted to strike Kaimovich, but the professor deftly dodged and grabbed his wrist. Albert Borisovich stared straight into his assistant's eyes, as if he wanted to peer into his soul. His gaze first chilled Kuznetsov, then turned him into an unbearably hot man. The professor squeezed Andrei's hand so tightly that he couldn't even move a finger. His wrist began to burn like fire. The boy felt unbearable pain and cried out. The firewood burned out before him, crackling. Kaimovich had disappeared, but his hand continued to burn. With difficulty, Kuznetsov opened his sleepy eyes and saw an ember on his wrist, which had flown off the fire and stuck to his skin. Andrei immediately shook it off and blew on the burnt area. I passed out so quickly. Oh, damn, but it all felt so real. His friends lay in their places. A monotonous snore and light snore came from the cave. Andrei threw a thick root they'd cut from an old tree onto the fire and tucked a few branches underneath. Now he was confident the fire wouldn't die out for another couple of hours. He took a sip from his flask and wiped his face with cold water to regain his composure. Rustling sounds, bird calls, and the occasional squeal of small animals could be heard in the forest around the camp. The breath of the mighty Ural Mountains echoed like a howling wind through the trees, bouncing off the rocks and rolling on into the wild, deserted lands. Andrei had never felt so weak and helpless in this wilderness. A drawn-out wolf howl could be heard somewhere in the distance. A few seconds later, a second predator responded, closer. A third cry rang out beyond their cave. For several more minutes, the pack continued to call out, terrifying every living thing around. Then, their howls were heard north of the camp. The forest hunters decided not to engage with the humans and retreated. The scientist glanced at his watch, looked distrustfully into the dark Ural forest, and went to wake Ivan. Chapter 62. The Last Hunt. This morning hadn't gone well. The robots had woken the catchers earlier than usual and sent them to the medical bay. Rich sat on the floor, rubbing his sore shoulder. A minute ago, he'd been injected with some kind of drug, and now he felt an unpleasant burning sensation in the muscle. The Englishman had been afraid of injections since childhood, and now they'd stuck a thick needle into his arm and slowly injected a vaccine. Relieved that the ordeal was finally over, Cook Jr. prepared for the long flight back. But the ship's owners had other plans. They took off and landed frequently, changing their route and taking measurements. Thus, the ship circled half the planet and landed somewhere on the outskirts of Europa. After examining the catchers after vaccination and ensuring that everything was in order, the Tunians announced that a new sorting was necessary. After listening to the command, Rich, Chang, and Louis exchanged glances. The aliens noticed this and realized that the task had not been entirely clear. One of the Tunians spoke again. Cook Jr. distinguished phrases in English interspersed with some incomprehensible sounds, as no human language yet had the words the Tunians were trying to use to describe the virus and the infected. As far as I understand, they want us to drag a couple of those freaks we fought on the last sortie onto the ship, the Peruvian suggested. It looks like it, but they muttered something untranslatable. That's what's worrying us. We might miss some important details in this order, Rich frowned. Well, we'll deliver whoever they ask for, and then we'll sort it out. If anything happens, we can always play dumb. The ever-positive Louis winked and nudged his friend in the ribs. They need the infected. They're easy prey, the Chinese man remarked indifferently, and went to put on his protective suit. 15 minutes later, the team of hunters abandoned the ship and set off in shuttles to retrieve the objects. They hid the transport, crossed a small forest, and found themselves on the outskirts of a quiet, cozy village. Low, white houses with brown roof tiles loomed ahead. A little further on, a couple dozen wind turbines towered on a hill, their blades lazily spinning in the rays of the morning sun. Rich felt a lingering melancholy wash over him. He recognized his native provincial England. It was almost as patriarchal as it had been centuries ago, with the only exception being that the roof of each house was a single, massive solar panel, shaped like roof tiles. And the paths and roads glowed in the dark. The village seemed deserted. The hunters spent about half an hour observing the surroundings from cover, but didn't spot a single living soul. Finally, the boys decided to move on and explore the area. Ahead, a square appeared, with a monument to 2 local soldiers who died during the Kuwait campaign. Rich recognized the place. He'd visited here several times as a child, visiting his mother's distant relatives. When the wind blew from the hospital, everyone smelled the rotten, burnt flesh. Mounds of corpses smoked and smoky in the square in front of the clinic. But there were no living people in sight. The Englishman remembered his goal, and was even glad that this time he didn't have to catch ordinary people, especially his own countrymen. Suddenly, the Chinese man Cheng snapped his fingers, crouched down, and pointed toward a large truck with a green semi-trailer. Rich and Lewis noticed the infected near the vehicle. 5 zombies surrounded the tractor-trailer, as if waiting for something. Meanwhile, 2 girls were hiding under the vehicle. One of them had been shot in the leg, blood soaking her jeans and seeping onto the asphalt. Her friend was quietly sobbing and whispering a prayer with trembling lips. A dark-skinned, black-haired zombie, resembling an Indian, began to bend lower and lower, then dropped to his knees, lay on his stomach and peered under the truck. The wounded woman screamed in fear at the sight of the grinning face. "Maggie, run! Run!" The second girl began to wail. "My leg hurts, I can't step. Irma, get out alone. Do you hear me?" "Go away, I'll distract them," her friend replied, resigned to her fate. Meanwhile, the infected man crawled on his belly under the trailer. The other zombies noticed and began watching him. The cannibal tried to reach Maggie but was immediately kicked in the face by her friend. The cannibal grunted discontentedly, and the other infected also lay down on the asphalt and noticed the girls. The English women realized they had only minutes to live. Suddenly, 3 zombies jerked their bodies and passed out. A clatter of feet was heard, and silhouettes flitted near the truck. The other 2 cannibals ignored the sudden appearance of the hunters and continued crawling toward the girls. But the infected were grabbed by the legs and unceremoniously yanked out from under the truck. A few more moments of brief struggle, and the 2 corpses stared glassily up at the overcast English sky. Irma and Maggie were in no hurry to leave their shelter, even though they knew it wouldn't protect them from strangers. Luis peered under the truck, his face breaking into a friendly, toothy smile. The Peruvian winked at the girls. "Come to me. Don't be afraid. It's safe. It's safe." Meanwhile, Rich and Chang bound the hands and feet of 3 infected, stunning them with a shock. Then they placed special muzzles on their heads. Irma and Maggie climbed out from under the trailer and looked at their rescuers with interest. "Thank you. And who are you, a commando?" the blonde Irma asked hopefully. "Yeah, intergalactic," Rich chuckled, realizing that he couldn't help them anymore. "Run from here to some safe place." Maggie stepped on her injured leg and winced in pain. "A safe place? There aren't any more of those around here, handsome. Either from zombies or from hunger. But the end will come anyway. Make your way to the sea, closer to the port. Food should be easier there, and you might find some decent people, Cook Jr. advised, eyeing the pretty girls. And you? Not normal enough? Irma smiled, causing Louis to sigh deeply. Not for this planet anymore, Cheng muttered, calling for the shuttles. Conspiracy was no longer necessary. There was no need to hide. The girls were surprised to see two drones approach a few minutes later. The strangers loaded the bound zombies into them and quickly disappeared from view.
I don't know who they are, but I think the advice about the port can be used, Maggie said, watching the hunters fly away. We'll find a place where we can sit quietly, treat your leg, and then go to the sea, Irma agreed. Rich, Louis, and Cheng soon arrived at the main ship, their mission complete. The Thunians placed the infected in a special compartment, where they were tended to by robotic medics. One zombie was untied and attacked the apparatus, but after tasting it, it quickly lost interest in the lifeless device. After all the tests, the infected were put into a coma and placed in special sealed chambers. The final foray was successful. The catchers had done their job well. The Thunians were satisfied and decided it was time to return home. Rich lay on the floor of his cell crying as he said goodbye to his homeland. He knew he'd never see old England again, never go to a football match, or have a beer with his friends. The ship left Earth's atmosphere and flew to the distant alien planet of Tun, where the secrets of the universe's terrible epidemics were well remembered. Chapter 63. On a Chain. The silence of the dark room was broken by the man's heavy, ragged breathing. He lay on the bed, one arm dangling almost to the floor, the other handcuffed to the iron bedpost. His beard still bore traces of dried blood. His broken nose was swollen. A large hematoma darkened under his right eye, and his body ached from multiple bites and lacerations. The man groaned and tried to roll over, but the metal chain from the handcuffs prevented it. The wounded man had not yet regained consciousness, and occasionally thrashed around the bed as if in a fit of delirium. Half an hour later, he opened his eyes. The room was empty. He saw a dark green ceiling above him covered in ancient plastic panels. His throat was torn with thirst. His head was spinning, and every movement was accompanied by pain. The wounded man looked at his strapped arm in surprise. He tried to recall the events of the recent past, but the back of his head began to ache terribly at the slightest attempt to recall. The front door creaked, and a cool breeze blew into the room. The man couldn't turn his head. He couldn't see who had entered, so he waited silently for someone to approach him. Soft footsteps were heard. A small hand gently touched the wounded man's shoulder. Tanya saw that her mentor had regained consciousness, rejoiced, and sat on the edge of the bed. "Good morning. How are you? Does it hurt a lot?" "Hello. It'll heal." "Morning, you said. How long was I unconscious? And where are we?" "They brought us here yesterday afternoon. I thought they'd eat you right there on the road, and Dodge too. There's a doctor here. Everyone calls him Makarick. He treated you and gave you some medicine." "Dodge. He's alive?" Memory gradually returned to the professor. He recalled the infected attack, the searing pain in his bitten arm refreshing the memory. The girl looked towards the front door, as if listening to something, and then nodded. Yes, he was tied up with the other dogs. The rest? What rest? There are lots of dogs here, and cats too. And also a few goats, piglets, chickens, turkeys, and cows. Tanya said animatedly, sharing her new impressions. Okay, I see. What else? Tell me where we are. Everyone here eats in one house and calls it the dining hall. Everyone goes to bed at 10 o'clock and gets up at 7 in the morning. Except for those who are sick, like you. There are even 2 boys here. One is really little, and the other is 11, Tanya said shyly. Albert Borisovich smiled slightly, catching the romantic notes in the girl's voice. What about the adults? Are there many of them? Do they bully you? No, they are strict, but not evil. What did you tell about us? The little girl thought for a second, looked up at the ceiling and started kicking her legs. That we are from Novosibirsk. You are my dad, and we are looking for a safe place where there are no zombies. Okay, well done. Everything is correct, Khaimovich muttered under his breath. But don't you know why they tied me up? The doctor said for everyone's safety. He wanted to talk when you wake up. I'll call him now. The professor nodded affirmatively, and the girl ran outside. About 10 minutes later, she returned with a tall man in a blue tracksuit. The doctor was plump, with massive arms, a large head, short hair, a round face, and a brown wart on his nose. The stranger looked no older than 40, but everyone had long since called him Makarik. His appearance more closely resembled that of a gangster from the wild gangster days of the 1990s. This big man's voice, by contrast, was high-pitched and ill-matched his powerful appearance. The doctor sat down on the neighboring bed and gave his patient a friendly look. Hi, are you awake? How are you feeling? It's bearable, it just hurts everywhere. Thanks for your help. Thank the guys. I didn't do anything special. I gave you an anti-inflammatory, stitched up a few places, taped them up and bandaged them. We're not exactly well stocked with medications here. Honestly, when I saw you, I didn't expect you'd pull through. They really chewed you up. Another centimeter and they would have severed your carotid artery. But we were lucky. They didn't hit anything important. It's just, Albert Borisovich understood his interlocutor's train of thought. Will I turn into a zombie? Well, yes, or maybe not, it depends on luck. The doctor reached out and touched the professor's forehead. There doesn't seem to be a fever, which is a good sign. But it's too early to rejoice. You'll be under observation and in handcuffs until tomorrow. What next? If I don't start biting? Berkut will decide. He's the boss here. He's not here today. He'll be back tomorrow and you can talk. Can I at least go to the toilet? Khaimovich jerked his hand and jingled the metal chain. The doctor put his hand in the pocket of his tracksuit, took out a key and unfastened the handcuffs. The potty's there. You're not allowed to leave the house. There's security outside, on duty 24/7. We're very strict, so don't be stupid. I'm not violent, Albert Borisovich answered calmly and went to the restroom. A few minutes later, the professor returned, lay down on the bed, and snapped the cuff on himself. The doctor slapped his thick thighs and stood up. Well, good. Get well soon anyway. You'll be fed on schedule. I'll stop by again this evening. If you feel like going to the toilet, knock on the wall or shout louder. Can I talk to Tanya some more? With whom? With my daughter, Khaimovich clarified in a slightly shaky voice. Yes. I'll tell her to come in. The girl returned half an hour later with a tray on which she brought a mug of hot tea, a couple of pieces of bread, and a cup of stewed buckwheat porridge. Here, they gave it to me in the kitchen, and tonight there will be dried fruit compote. Looking at the food, Albert Borisovich felt a strong hunger. He hadn't eaten for almost a day, and his body was rapidly recovering and demanding nourishment. The scientist pounced on breakfast with gusto, eagerly listening to everything Tanya told him. I ran back, then I saw the car, fell, and they started shooting. I lay on the road and cried, then ran back to you. But you were covered in blood and not breathing. I thought you were dead, and so was Dodge. But then he whined and got up, and you were still lying there, not moving. But one guy said you were still alive.
They argued about what to do. Then they put you down in the car, and Dodge and I sat next to you. Listen, is there really a guard at the entrance? The mentor suddenly asked. Yes, there's a bearded guy with a machine gun, sitting there, scowling, and his eyes are so piercing. Where are we anyway? What is this place? There are a lot of houses here, bathhouses, vegetable gardens, greenhouses. There are fences and guarded gates everywhere. This fat doctor asked an old woman to look after me. She's very strict and often scolds. Her name is Baba Zina, and I'm afraid of her. How many people are there here in total? Tanya began counting on her fingers, trying to remember everyone she'd seen. She lost count several times and started counting again. But the professor eventually realized there were at least 2 or 3 dozen people there. Have you seen their main one? I think they call him Berkut. No, I didn't see you. The little girl shook her head. I have to go, otherwise Baba Zina will scold me. She just told me to take the food and come straight back. She says I need to help around the house. Albert Borisovich frowned. You are not allowed to communicate with me? The girl shrugged her shoulders in confusion. Everything here is somehow strange and very strict. There's an uncle who shouts loudly at others, and everyone immediately runs to do what he says. I don't like it here. When are we going to move on? For now, I'm kind of their prisoner. Their boss is coming tomorrow. We'll talk, and I hope they'll let us go. And don't be capricious. Listen to that old woman, Zina. Behave well. When you're free, come over. We'll chat. Tanya reluctantly left the house, and the professor was left alone. His strength was slowly returning. He could do nothing but lie there and ponder. What kind of people are these? Who is this Berkut? What are their rules? What if they don't want to let them go? How can I escape? These questions made his head ache again. Albert Borisovich groaned, turning slightly. He closed his eyes and the ferocious faces of the infected flashed before his eyes. Kyamovich recalled every moment of the fight up until the moment he lost consciousness. The main thing is that we're alive. We're all alive, and then we'll figure it out, the professor muttered, feeling the dizziness getting worse. It's okay, I'll rest up, get some treatment, and then we'll move on. Albert Borisovich was still weak and had slipped into sleep without realizing it. Meanwhile, the girl was helping the adults in the kitchen. Baba Zina assigned her to wash the dishes and then sent her to fetch firewood for the stove. Tanya remembered her mentor's words and tried her best to obey so she could escape this place as quickly as possible. Chapter 64. Nirvana. After the defeat of the Zhavarov gang, the mood in the village significantly improved. People believed in themselves, in their ability to resist and survive. Victory had come at the cost of Vasilich's life, but everyone understood the risk he was taking and that anyone could have found themselves in his place. The morning after their comrade's funeral, Boris, Fyodor, and Lev Nikolaevich set off in Robocop's car to the Zhavarov base to scout out the situation. The captured biker hadn't lied during interrogation. Life was indeed simmering at the Nirvana Recreation Center. A wind turbine spun lazily on a hill, at the foot of which stood several cottages and outbuildings. The base was located practically in the forest, making it easy to observe. The men hid behind the trees and took turns peering through binoculars. A lively restlessness permeated the enemy camp. The border guard counted 3 adult men, 1 old man, 4 children, and 7 women. "If they don't have any more fighters, then these ones are no longer dangerous," said RoboCop, handing the binoculars to the Cossack. "Well, yes, only women are wandering around," Fyodor agreed after a short observation. The president scratched his stubble and thought, "Will they survive after we have destroyed their main forces?" "What are you suggesting? Go to them and say, 'We shot your men here, welcome under our wing now'?" Boris chuckled. Lev Nikolaevich tried to explain his position diplomatically. "It's not a fact that these people were in league with Jawar. He could have kept them here as a labor force, providing security and a crust of bread. But now they have neither. These are women and children, after all. Well, they seem to have a living. There's an animal pen over there, and there are some animals in it. But overall, I agree with Nikolaevich. We don't want innocent people to suffer because of our squabbles." The president's words convinced Fyodor. RoboCop thought about this situation for a long time and finally said, "I suggest we drop by in a couple of days. We'll say we stumbled across their position by chance and strike up a friendly chat. And then we'll see." Around lunchtime, the men packed up their observation post and headed back to the village, which they were afraid to leave for long. At the meeting, they decided to temporarily suspend work on the perimeter. Boris selected several observation posts overlooking all approaches to Dalny and organized round-the-clock surveillance. "The situation is tense for now. It looks like we've killed almost everyone, but you never know. We need to take up defensive positions until the weekend. If everything goes quiet, we'll leave one post at the entrance and get back to business," RoboCop explained. "We need one post standing guard 24/7 at all times. Then, once we've secured the perimeter, we need to build an observation tower," Lev Nikolaevich suggested. The Cossack tapped his fingers on the table. "A watchtower, a ditch, barbed wire. We need everything. We're practically living in wartime. It took us so long to adjust to the old way of life, we thought that since we live on the outskirts, it wouldn't affect us much. But it has, and it still might." The Greek poured himself a glass of kvass from a 3-liter glass jar and downed it immediately. Then he winced slightly with a satisfied expression and ate some green onions. "We need communications. We now have captured Javarov radios, but that's still not enough. Ideally, every home should have one." Boris yawned and moved his prosthesis, stretching his numb leg. "Once we're done with the perimeter, we'll go to the city. Maybe we'll be able to loot there and get some more communications." That was the end of the meeting. Everyone received their duty roster for the next 3 days. Despite the recent victory, no one relaxed. They understood that trouble could arise at any moment. Chapter 65. A Risky Idea. Several days passed, but no one bothered the residents of Dalny anymore. People gradually returned to their pre-war routines. The women tended to their gardens and housework, while the men continued to work on the perimeter to protect the village. Fyodor, Boris, and Lev Nikolaevich, as agreed, went to Nirvana for a follow-up reconnaissance mission. But to their surprise, they discovered the abandoned, empty base. Everyone had left, taking their animals and any valuables they could carry. The border guard couldn't even believe it at first.
It's strange to abandon such a safe place. Where could they have moved? Maybe they found out how their gang was wiped out. So they decided the place wasn't so safe. So they ran away. I'd do the same thing in their place, Fyodor suggested, looking around the empty cages where the rabbits had recently been. RoboCop looked up, and the blades of a wind turbine flashed above the treetops. What should we do with the base? Just abandon it? What a shame. What do we need it for? We only have 1.5 people left in the entire village.
We just need to hold Dalny, the Cossack said, spreading his arms and kicking an old rubber ball. At that moment, the president picked up a dirty, worn-out child's sneaker from the ground. We'll keep this place in mind in case we need to urgently evacuate the village. There's water here, and a roof over our heads too. The area is hidden from prying eyes, so we can wait out any danger if it happens. Agreed. Well, that's what we'll decide then. We'll drop by here from time to time, check things out, so to speak, the border guard concluded. Let's go home. There's still a lot to do. The tasks and worries multiplied faster than New Zealand rabbits. No sooner did he tackle one task than 5 more would appear. In the evening, after a difficult day, Lev Nikolaevich informed Fyodor and Boris of his plan. Tomorrow I want to go scout out the shelter. Maybe I can somehow get inside. I don't know how, but I can't sit back any longer. Where is this secret base of yours? RoboCop asked. The president described as best he could the road to the bunker and what it looked like from the outside. So the government shelter is right under the observatory? It's right here. The border guard chuckled, excitedly stirring sugar into his tea. He was eager to get a closer look at the place. Fyodor twirled his mustache thoughtfully. And I thought your main center was in the Urals, near Yamantau or whatever that mountain is called. There are several centers, and the local bunker is classified as a minor security facility, explained Lev Nikolaevich, who himself wasn't very familiar with the structure of this bunker hierarchy. The head of his own security service knew them like the back of his hand, but he had become infected shortly before the evacuation from Moscow. RoboCop crossed his arms over his chest and began to pace back and forth, something he often did when he was deep in thought. I wonder what kind of thing they've built right next to us. I don't think you can get to it unnoticed, since it's such a serious object. We've heard about that observatory, of course. So, it was just a dummy? The president corrected him. The observatory is actually operational, only fully automated. It was on the books of the Space Forces. Kornilov tensely massaged his temples. I have an idea. I want to test it. I left the bunker through the back exit. It leads outside the perimeter. A back door, so to speak. Anything beyond that is completely unguarded. For the past 24 hours, no one has bothered to close the hatch behind me. So there's a chance I could at least go down to the underground tunnel. It leads to the sanitary buffer zone, and beyond that, the main entrance to the shelter. There's an armored door there, of course, but I have no other ideas for now. We can't take them by force. We'll have to try some cunning. We'll scout them out tomorrow, and then we'll figure something out, the Cossack said, knowing deep down that getting the president's son out was nearly impossible. The next day, Fyodor, Lyoka, and Gorik went to the vineyards behind the barbed wire. The rest of the men dismantled one of the abandoned houses for building materials to reinforce the perimeter. When the sun reached its zenith, Boris took off his cap, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and gave the command to stand down. That's it. Siesta. Let's rest until 4, otherwise it's impossible to breathe. I'm sweating profusely. I haven't drunk as much as I've already sweated today. I'm on duty at 4, the Greek reminded casually. Okay, maybe our guys are just returning from the vineyards. It's nice, of course, to go on a business trip. They're done in a couple of hours and now they're probably sunbathing. But by evening they'll show up looking tired, like they've been toiling all day. The border guard laughed, walking with his friends toward the village. Maybe they'll even go to the sea for a swim, Lev Nikolaevich added with slight envy. RoboCop tripped on an anthill with his prosthetic, cursed automatically and shook his head. I wouldn't risk it, and I don't think Fedya would either. There are a lot of zombies closer to the coast, and you could run into other problems no matter what. By the way, what are your plans now? I want to work in the shed. I make all sorts of self-defense things from time to time, the president answered, slightly embarrassed. Oh, that's interesting. I'll drop by later if you don't mind, the border guard coughed. Of course not. RoboCop looked towards the cottage, in the attic of which an observation post had been set up. Grek, who's our thing now? Ksyusha should be there. We should get the female team involved in shooting more often. Once we've finished with the perimeter, we can start training, Boris said as if to himself. Everyone dined today at Marina's, who, as usual, was accompanied by Oksana. Despite the end of the world, the food in the village was even better than in the government shelter. After finishing his meal, Lev Nikolaevich thanked the hostess and caught Marina's eye. She looked at him differently today, which slightly unsettled Kornilov. He quickly rose and headed for his quarters. After feeding Agat and pouring him some fresh water, Lev Nikolaevich went to the workshop. The president knew he'd run out of ammunition sooner or later, so in his free time he enjoyed crafting spears, clubs with protruding nails, and other hand-to-hand combat weapons that could be made from scrap materials. Today the day dragged on especially long, and Kornilov felt a nervous tremor creeping over him from time to time. He had arranged with Fyodor and Boris to go to the observatory that evening. Now thoughts of this haunted Lev Nikolaevich. Towards sunset, the Cossack, his son, and Gorik returned from the vineyards. The heat was gradually subsiding, and the work was no longer as hard as it had been in the blazing sun. Boris warned the others about the upcoming trip, and when the sun set, the men went home. After resting for about half an hour, the border guard Fyodor and the president set off. Lyoka was eager to go with them, but his father insisted he stay home. Fyodor started his electric crossover, and the friends set off. They passed the forest and the site of the recent ambush, descended the hill, and slowly drove toward the observatory. After a while, Lev Nikolaevich noticed a large old Ford on the side of the road and asked to stop. This is the same mobile home where I was almost eaten. I want to check something. Do you need it? Boris asked, alarmed. I'll be quick. Keep an eye on the road, Kornilov said, grabbing his rifle and cautiously approaching the van. Everything remained the same as the night he'd been surrounded by the infected. Lev Nikolaevich slowly opened the door to the living quarters. A sharp, disgusting stench immediately assaulted his nose. The stench made him step back, almost making him vomit. Even Fyodor and Boris, standing to the side, grimaced in disgust. "Oh, what the hell is that?" RoboCop spat and shouted. "The owners of this motorhome," the president replied, catching his breath. He tied the t-shirt around his face, peered inside, and found the woman and children in the same place. The zombies were no longer making a sound, breathing only faintly, unable to even rise. The ropes that bound the infected had cut deep into their skin, creating disgusting, rotting wounds. Due to the heat in the stuffy, confined space, their bodies began to decompose, despite Nova's best efforts to keep them alive. Kornilov noticed one of the children stir and look at the stranger with a dull, unfocused gaze. Lev Nikolaevich decided to end the torment of the family, whose camper had become his short-lived refuge.
3 shots rang out, and the president climbed out, gasping for fresh air.
"And why did you even want to go there?" the Cossack yawned, not taking his eyes off the road, which was already starting to become covered with leaves and dust. There was a woman and her children rotting alive. When I first saw them, I couldn't kill them right away. I thought maybe the owner of the van would show up. It was his family, after all, so he'd decide. But since so much time had passed and no one had returned, I decided they'd had enough of their suffering, Kornilov explained. They continued driving without any unscheduled stops. Theodore turned off the headlights, using only the fog lights to illuminate the road, which almost caused him to miss the turnoff he needed. The car stopped at a checkpoint, and Lev Nikolaevich said they should continue on foot to avoid attracting attention. The men turned off the asphalt and crossed the field. They climbed slowly, stopping and stopping, and soon everyone was breathing heavily. The evening had become sultry. There were a few scattered trees along the way, but they didn't provide much cover for sneaking up on the observatory. The president was almost certain his adversaries weren't monitoring the outer perimeter. What threat could there be to the well-armed men hiding in a secret, camouflaged, and secure underground bunker? Much time had passed since Chernov had driven the president out of hiding. Alexander probably thought his former boss was already dead and didn't expect an attack. At least, that's what Lev Nikolaevich hoped. A dark, high fence loomed ahead, and beyond it, the top of the observatory was visible. An uneasy silence weighed on the men. Kornilov couldn't find the hidden hatch for a long time. Boris and Fyodor kept glancing nervously around. "Here it is. I found it," Lev Nikolaevich finally said, barely audible. The friends came closer, everyone even more excited than during the ambush at the Javarovsky. The president pulled the hatch and it rose, revealing a dark, deep well. "They still haven't locked the door behind me. Here's that back entrance, in case of an emergency evacuation from the shelter." Robocop looked inside and sighed. "Well, the easy part is behind us. Let's go down." Chapter 66. The Burden of Leadership. The lock clicked softly, the door opened, and a soldier appeared on the threshold. His face was swollen from the previous night's drinking, and his head was pounding with a hangover. The soldier glanced lazily at the women and children huddled in the cramped little room, burped, hiccuped, and then hoarsely shouted, "Rise and shine. Everyone stand up. Time to get to work. The last one out will get 10 lashes with a belt." The people awoke reluctantly, looking at their overseer with hatred and fear. Such a life seemed unbearable to them. Many were ready to flee to the surface and trust in fate rather than endure daily beatings, abuse, and violence. The hardest hit was for Pyotr, the son of the exiled president. The boy was assigned the dirtiest and most difficult jobs Chernov and his associates could devise. Second only to Alexander in the bunker was now FSB Captain Bogdan Matveyev, nicknamed the 10th. The new leader elevated him above the other fighters and granted him almost unlimited power. After the coup, several more army and security forces personnel who had not participated in the rebellion joined Chernov's junta. But in exchange for their lives and a certain status, they agreed to serve their new masters. Everyone else became virtual slaves and referred to Alexander and his men as Chernivtsi. But gradually, relationships within the ruling group began to fray. Discipline weakened, and clashes and conflicts became more frequent. Duty schedules were violated,
and privileged fighters, feeling completely unpunished, drank from dawn to dusk and raped girls.
Chernov understood that if he touched these few allies, he would be left almost alone against all the oppressed inhabitants of the shelter. So, for now, he turned a blind eye to the chaos that reigned in the bunker. The guard woke the prisoners, leaned against the doorway and frowned. He thought they were waking up and getting ready for work too slowly, so he slapped them a few times to speed things up. Then he spotted Pyotr, grabbed the boy roughly by the shoulder, breathed a strong whiff of fumes and barked in his face. "And you need to move your butt twice as fast as everyone else, brat. Today you have a shift in the laundry." The guard pushed Peter into the hallway, kicked him in the butt, and grinned angrily. The boy remained on his feet, winced in pain, clenched his fists, but walked forward without turning around. Peter had learned to be patient and humble. At first he'd snapped, but after being beaten so severely several times, he now hid his anger deep inside, waiting for the right moment to vent it. But today the president's son's day didn't go well from the very morning. As on his way to the laundry he ran into his worst enemy, Alexander Chernov. "Stop!" The leader grabbed the teenager by the neck and pinned him against the wall. Pyotr hit the back of his head and felt everything go dark for a moment. Alexander squeezed his throat and hissed through his teeth. "I see you've become talkative lately. Who are you planning to slaughter like dogs?" The boy remained silent and looked away. He realized he had been betrayed. In recent days, watching discipline in the junta crumble, Pyotr had tried to persuade several people to stage a coup. And one of them had told Chernov everything. "I hear and know everything you say and think. I can kill you right now. Or even better, I'll make your life such a living hell that you'll beg me to die." "The wolf cub has grown teeth, but I'll knock them out," the leader said, giving the teenager a resounding slap. Blood began to flow from his nose, and the boy pressed his hand to it. He had become accustomed to beatings, and understood that the less he said, the less he would be beaten. Alexander, looking at the suffering of his enemy's son with a satisfied expression, added, "Today they'll tie a chain to your leg, and you'll sleep where you work. I've already let you do too much. Get out of here." Pyotr, sniffling, strode into the laundry room. Ever since the day his father was banished, all his thoughts had been focused on revenge. A cauldron of rage seethed within the teenager, but his face remained calm, even phlegmatic. The boy realized that Alexander had informants even among the prisoners. He couldn't trust anyone. Now he had only himself to rely on. The president's son came up with a plan as simple as it was outrageous. Kill one of the soldiers with a kitchen knife. Take his weapon and kill the rest. Fortunately, there weren't that many enemies. He still hoped that when things got rough, the other prisoners would come to his aid. "It's better to die than to live like this," Kornilov Jr. firmly decided to himself. He reached the laundry room. Lyubov Sergeyevna, the widow of one of the officers executed after the coup, was already working there. She was sorting dirty laundry and putting it in washing machines. She noticed the boy and smiled slightly. But then her face quickly assumed a sad expression. "Ah, Petya, hi. Did they send you to me?" "Yes, and they promised that I would stay here overnight with a chain on my leg. They've gone completely wild, the bastards." Lyubov Sergeyevna whispered almost silently and looked at the teenager with pity. Meanwhile, Chernov was strolling through his domain. He approached the emergency exit through which Lev Nikolaevich had been expelled and stopped. There was no one at the post. Alexander's face twisted into a grimace of displeasure. "Slackers, We need to ask Matveyev what kind of mess he's made here. Former FSB captain Bogdan Matveyev, known to everyone as 10th, was now considered both head of the security service and Minister of Defense in the safe house. Chernov quickly walked down the hallway in search of his right-hand man, and soon found 10th in the gym. He was working out with 2 other soldiers. "Good morning. Why is our 4th post unguarded?" Alexander asked sullenly. "What? What post? Oh, the escape tunnel? I just pulled some guys out of there to back me up. See, I'm doing the bench press." "You should have called me." The new president crossed his arms over his chest with displeasure. No, Sasha. Look at the weight I'm working with. I need a trained person to be on guard here," the captain chuckled. The fighters were lazily working out on the exercise machines at the time, and burst into laughter, glancing sideways at their slight leader, who was not the most athletic of builds. Chernov's neck flushed sharply, a sign he was about to lose his temper. The head of the junta ignored the laughter and stared at 10th. "I want to go to the surface. You come with me." Bogdan shrugged his powerful shoulders. "What did you forget there?" "I want to take some measurements and look around. Let's go." "No, I can't. I just warmed up. Let's do it after training." Chernov was clearly not happy with this attitude towards him, especially in front of witnesses, but he restrained himself so as not to escalate the situation. "It's not urgent. How long will it take you to finish?" "Well," 10th looked up at the ceiling. "About 2 hours, probably, with the weights. Then I'll do a little punching bag work, a shower, a sauna, this and that. And then lunch will be soon. We'll go for a walk before lunch. You'll work up an appetite at the same time. I'll be at my place, come on over." "Shall we go up together?" "Yes." Alexander turned around and left the gym. He needed to think through a plan of action. The joy of being in charge quickly faded when the fighters felt they had impunity. Lev Nikolaevich enjoyed great authority, had a solid entourage, and maintained discipline until the coup. But the military's attitude toward Chernov was quite different. They considered Alexander a desk jockey, a white-collar worker from the presidential administration, who was completely unfit for the role of military leader. Chernov understood that only thanks to the support of the 10th were he still at the top of the hierarchy of this small, intimidated society. And indeed, he was still alive. But with each passing day, Alexander grew less and less confident in the reliability of his right hand. A few hours later, the former FSB captain knocked on Chernov's door. The junta leader was lounging in a chair watching football. "Who's playing? What's the score?" Matveyev asked with languid interest. He didn't understand the point of rewatching old games. The 2028 Champions League final. Liverpool versus Barcelona, a unique match. Why? This is the first Champions League final under the new rules. And everything that happens for the first time remains in history forever. Chernov loved football, but he wasn't a fan of any particular team. He loved football itself. Alexander supported several clubs in different leagues. Whenever possible, he would fly to Europe to watch top matches in stadiums, then rewatch them at home on a huge video wall, analyzing individual moments. In 2027, a true revolution took place in the world of football. The new FIFA president, Dutchman Herbert van der Palen, changed the fundamental rules of the game, splitting the football community into 2 camps, those who supported and those who opposed reform. Halftime was shortened by 10 minutes, and each team now fielded 8 players plus a goalkeeper. The field itself also became slightly smaller, but not significantly. There was much more space for the players, making it more difficult for defensive teams to park the bus. The game became more exciting and dynamic. The percentage of shots on goal,
the number of dribbles, and the conversion rate increased. Matches with 4 or 5 goals became commonplace. Up to 4 substitutions were now allowed, and the coach, if desired, could change half the lineup to increase the tempo and turn the game around late in the game. The approach to training and physical preparation changed, and new tactical schemes began to be developed. The pros and cons of the reforms were endlessly debated, further fueling the hype around what was already the most popular game on the planet. Van der Palen insisted on reducing the role of the field referee. Whenever there was a pause in the match, the stopwatch would stop, as in hockey, and the concept of additional time became a thing of the past. Now the game was played in 2 halves of 35 clear minutes each. The video referee became a more influential figure. He could review a replay from a dozen angles and communicate the appropriate decision to the field referee. Sensors on the player's clothing clearly detected offside situations and immediately alerted the referee. Post-match scandals and complaints about referees became fewer. For a sport as conservative as football, these changes were a true revolution. Football associations emerged that refused to accept the changes and announced the creation of classic football leagues. But FIFA firmly defended its position, and most top clubs and football officials supported the reforms. All leading leagues and international tournaments began to be held under the new rules. Chernov also liked the new football, but now, due to the epidemic, he could only watch replays of his favorite matches. "Well, shall we go? I'm really hungry," Bogdan said, trying to hurry his boss along. "Yes, we're going now," Alexander answered, without looking up from his viewing. "Definitely the 2 of us?" "Uh-huh." Chernov waited for Barcelona to equalize, reluctantly paused the video, and rose from his chair. 20 minutes later, they were already standing on the surface in protective suits. Alexander took out an air sampling device and took samples. "Why didn't you send our scientists to deal with this?" Tenth had to speak loudly. The protective mask on his head muffled the sound considerably. "You wanted to stretch your legs yourself. Aren't you curious about what's happening above ground? Don't you want to see the sky, the trees?" Alexander asked, strolling around the grounds. "I don't want to turn into a stupid, hungry zombie, and I'll manage without the sky somehow until this infection clears up." The former presidential advisor said nothing. Life after the coup was becoming increasingly tense with each passing day. He feared that his own accomplices could shoot him at any moment. Power, drinking, and women proved to be short-lived pleasures, and nothing fundamentally changed. Only after emerging from the shadows did Alexander realize what he truly wanted. He glanced at Tenth, who was clutching his machine gun and looking around with a disgruntled expression. Matviev felt uneasy on the surface. Chernov could have done everything alone, but he was afraid to leave the bunker without an escort. The junta leader feared that his rebel allies might lock the door behind him and simply not let him back in. With Tenth by his side, this seemed unlikely. The captain had real authority among the soldiers. "Well, have you done everything you came for? Are we going back?" Watching the eagle soaring high above. Chernov didn't answer. He seemed frozen, staring at the observatory's dome. "Reception. Are you frozen or something?" Bogdan wanted to lightly nudge Chernov's shoulder, but misjudged the force. Alexander swayed to the side, barely managed to stay on his feet, and glared at Matviev. "Didn't understand?" Bogdan raised his hands, palms up, in a conciliatory gesture and burst out laughing. "What? Haven't you eaten enough porridge? I give you a little push and you're already falling. I ask, but you don't answer, so I brought you out of your stupor." Chernov squinted and was about to spit on the ground but remembered he was wearing a protective suit and mask. It would have looked stupid, and he absolutely couldn't do anything stupid, even minor ones. The former presidential aide sighed heavily and said sternly, "We need to stop this mess. Tighten up the discipline. Drinking and screwing girls is only allowed when I give the go-ahead. There needs to be chain of command within the team. Anyone who leaves their post again will be locked in the punishment block for a week." Matveyev narrowed his eyes, the mask hiding his grin. "Tightening the nuts? Come on, just be careful not to strip the threads. The soldiers have sensed their will. You can't just line them up like that these days. You need to be more delicate here, that's my advice. Don't give me advice, just do your job. Start restoring order right now, let's go," Alexander said, striding toward the airlock. The 10th looked at his back intently and shook his head. Well, we'll see about that, Commander. Who will do what?" Once they passed through the buffer and sanitary zones, Chernov took off his protective suit and headed to the lab with the air samples. He then popped into the laundry room, glanced briefly at Pyotr, and went back to his compartment to finish watching the football match. No one bothered him for several hours, but towards evening there was a demanding knock on the door. One of the engineers appeared on the threshold and blurted out excitedly, "We have an accident with the refrigeration units." "What do you mean?" Alexander asked in surprise, rising from his chair. "The temperature inside the freezing units is rising. We can't find the cause yet."
There, Bogdan Olegovich is already sorting it out. He asked to call you. Chernov quickly rose from his chair. The phrase about Matveyev dealing with the problem alarmed the leader. "Let's go before 10th kills everyone there. I know how he likes to sort things out." Alexander reached the food hall and found Matveyev, 3 of his men, and 2 more technical specialists there. The engineers stood there, pale and frightened, as 10th was cursing them with the choicest curses. "What do you mean you don't know how to fix it? Are you an engineer or a dick in a glass? Didn't they teach you anything? What do they need you for here then? Should I shoot you in the head right away or in the leg first?" "We might need components we don't have in stock," one of the specialists mumbled, frightened, as he justified the situation. It was Yevgeny Kalmykov, the same engineer who had tried to escape with his comrade before the coup. "So, I'm going to cut off your balls and install these components in their place. Got it?" 10th continued yelling, trying to motivate the technicians to quickly solve the problem. "What's the matter?" Chernov asked discontentedly, standing behind Matveyev. Bogdan turned around and spread his arms. "Well, several tons of frozen meat, fish, chicken, and vegetables are about to go bad. These guys say they can't fix the refrigerators. We can't do just one, but the other one works." Kalmykov tried unsuccessfully to justify himself. "Well, great. Then you'll be eating the rotten stuff from the broken freezer, and we'll keep the other one for ourselves, okay? Otherwise, why the hell feed you if your hands are so weak and you can't fix a damn thing?" One of the soldiers, callsign Fly, chimed in. "It would be a good idea to call Zakhar Evgenievich. He knows everything here," suggested the second technician, remembering the shelter's chief engineer, who was currently in the infirmary. His condition had deteriorated sharply since the coup and the president's ouster. "Are you an idiot? He can barely speak after the stroke," Chernov replied irritably. "So, I'm giving you 24 hours. Do whatever you want, but the second freezing unit must be operational within 24 hours. "We'll try, but we can't guarantee anything," Kalmykov shrugged, and immediately received a kick in the stomach from Muka. "You were told to do something, then die, but do it," the fighter barked angrily, looming over the engineer who was doubled over in pain on the floor. "Get back. Who gave you permission to hit him?" Chernov said coldly and angrily. Why does he talk like that? It's none of your business. Alexander took a step forward, glaring at the soldier. Muka hesitated for a second, but then immediately went on the offensive. Whose business is it? Yours? You appointed yourself in charge, and what can you do? Either fix this fridge yourself, or recruit some techies to fuss over it, or you'll end up sharing the rotten stuff with them. Chernov realized that right now his authority was plummeting into such a deep abyss that he wouldn't be able to rise again once he landed. Alexander sensed Tenth's heavy gaze in his peripheral vision. Muka stared insolently and defiantly into the leader's eyes, his mouth twisted slightly into a smirk. The other two soldiers nodded their heads slightly, agreeing with their comrade's words. The former presidential advisor pulled his pistol from its holster and fired point blank. Muka collapsed with a weak groan, a pool of blood spreading on the floor beneath him. His fellow soldiers immediately aimed their machine guns at Chernov. The soldiers nervously glanced between Matveyev and Alexander, as if asking their commander what to do. The junta leader too kept his pistol raised and kept his gun pointed at the soldiers. It was now up to Tenth to decide which way the scales would tip, and how many more casualties there would be.
"Don't shoot! Keep your guns down!" Bogdan stepped between the soldiers and Chernov, shielding him with his chest.
"What's he doing? Hitting his own people?" one of the soldiers stuttered. "Lower the gun, I told you," Tenth barked and looked at Muka again. He stirred and began coughing painfully. Bogdan immediately assessed the situation and barked at the soldiers even louder. "Get him to the infirmary quickly. Both of you, drag him to the medical unit." Then, Medvedev turned to the engineers and yelled at them. "And you, run like a bullet to the doctors so that they can prepare the operating room." A few seconds later, only he and Chernov remained in the food block. "Damn it, what are you doing? They'll tear you to pieces now," the captain croaked in Alexander's face. "Well, then tell them to think before they open their mouths. I told you about discipline today. That's what it ends with. That's your responsibility," Chernov snapped. The 10th even choked in surprise. You're only breathing because I'm still here. They can kill us now if they want." "I elevated them, gave them power. They were Kornilov's errand boys. And this is their gratitude? The insolence of these creatures is beyond all bounds." "At least with him our meat didn't go bad," Bogdan grumbled sullenly, turning to the refrigerator. "It's the end, basically. There were already rumors that you weren't pulling your weight, but now even I can't help you. No offense." "Well, screw you," Chernov shrugged, calmly shooting Matveyev in the head and picking up his machine gun. Then he calmly stepped over the captain's corpse and quickly headed for the medical unit. As Alexander approached the central hall, he heard voices. "Well, that's it. Looks like the 10th one finished him off. Finally, we've put up with this jerk of a staff officer for so long. With him only." Before the soldier could finish his sentence, a burst of machine gun fire rang out, and 3 bodies fell to the floor. At that moment, the former presidential aide heard footsteps behind him. He had to hurry. Every second of delay could cost him his life. Instantly calculating several options in his mind, Chernov decided to change his plan. He crossed the central hall and headed for the emergency exit. It was the closest route up. But at that moment, one of the wounded soldiers pulled the dropped machine gun toward him and pulled the trigger. Chernov heard the roar of a shot and simultaneously felt a searing pain in his right leg, as if a red-hot metal rod had been driven into his thigh. Alexander managed to turn the corner and disappear into the corridor. Limping and overcoming pain, the former presidential advisor reached the entrance to the buffer zone. Hastily unlocking the door, he climbed out into the tunnel that led to the hatch to the surface. No one pursued him, and chaos erupted in the bunker. The fighter who had managed to wound Chernov lost consciousness within seconds. Two of his comrades lay dead next to him. The junta leader had vanished without a trace. His right-hand man, Bogdan Matviev, lay with a bullet through his skull. And Muka died on the operating table with a punctured lung. Anarchy reigned in the bunker. Chapter 67. Through the Forest. After Kuznetsov finished his night shift, he couldn't sleep for a long time. Overcome by the afterglow of his nighttime date with Albert Borisovich. But then he fell asleep so soundly that Katya barely managed to wake him up in the morning. "You're such a marmot. Zombies will gnaw you alive in your sleep and you won't even notice," Lizitsina grumbled with a smile, watching Andrei yawn and rub his sleepy eyes. Yes, I was absolutely floored. At first I couldn't sleep, and then, the scientist replied listlessly. He rose to his feet, cleared his throat, and wandered over to the fire, around which the whole group had already gathered. Having quickly devoured a meager breakfast, the friends broke camp and set out. Soon, the forest cave that had sheltered the travelers for the night disappeared from view. Max and Lena walked ahead. Katya and Andrei followed them, and the Vorobyevs brought up the rear of the group. "We'll walk through the forest for a couple of hours, and then we'll move towards the highway. Sooner or later we'll reach the asphalt," the cosmonaut thought, looking around. Masha picked a flower on the go and braided it into her hair. "If only we could at least get some bicycles, it would be more fun." Lizitsina heard her idea and turned around. "No way, I'm against it now. My butt would fall off if I rode my bikes to the sea." "It won't fall off, it'll just get even stronger and rounder." Andrei grinned and slapped the redhead below the back. "And what will make you stronger then?" Katya quipped, sticking out her tongue. Everyone laughed and continued chatting lightheartedly. The stress of yesterday's attack and the loss of the monster was already easing somewhat. From the outside, it might have looked like a group of tourists heading out for a short hike, walking through the forest. But each friend was constantly on guard, peering and listening intently into the green thicket. Meanwhile, the forest went about its daily summer life. Small animals scurried busily through the undergrowth. Birds flitted among the trees, and the sound of a woodpecker could be heard somewhere nearby. Once, the group even spotted a hare, but they didn't manage to shoot it. Around lunchtime, the friends made camp, but there was nothing to eat. They drank some water, rested on a fallen tree, and then continued on. "It's time to slowly turn towards the road. I hope we'll be on the highway by evening," Ivan said, adjusting the route. However, the asphalt was slow to appear. The highway curved, but the wanderers were unaware of this. Soon a quiet murmuring sound was heard ahead. About 10 minutes later, they came to a wide, cold stream that blocked their path. The friends walked downstream a short distance and found a suitable place to cross. "There are some big rocks here. We'll cross to the other side," the cosmonaut suggested, placing his sneaker on a wet boulder. Vorobyov, backpack on his shoulders, carefully stepped across, balancing first on one foot, then the other. Then Masha took up the task of crossing the stream, and within seconds she was standing on the other bank. Max, Andrei, and Katya had no trouble crossing either. Lena was the last to go, timidly stepping on each rock, afraid of slipping into the cold water and getting her feet wet. She only had 2 steps left, but the girl froze, hesitant. "Damn, I won't be able to jump. The stone is far away." You can do it. I'll back you up, Vorobyov encouraged, holding out his hands to her. Lena didn't push off hard enough, slid the toe of her sneaker along the edge of the cobblestone, and swung her arms. Ivan took a sharp step and managed to catch her, but he himself found himself ankle-deep in the stream. A slightly frightened Lena finally found herself on the ground, and the cosmonaut had to empty the water from his sneakers. A few minutes later, everyone continued on their way. But less than half an hour later, another delay occurred. The travelers came to a stop in a large, muddy swamp. The soil had become soft and watery. Stunted trees grew sparsely in this quagmire, and the hummocks jutted out too far from each other. We need to go around it, otherwise here you can not only get your feet wet, but also your head. Andre looked at the swamp with disbelief. Or the mosquitoes will eat me alive, Max grumbled, slapping himself on the exposed spots where the winged bloodsuckers had attached themselves. A swarm of insects was already swarming around the group. Everyone waved branches at them, but it was of little use. It was already past 7 o'clock in the evening when the travelers finally reached the highway. Tired, hungry, and bitten by midges and mosquitoes, the friends even cried out with joy when they spotted a gray strip of asphalt through the trees. Now at least, they no longer had to wander at random through the forest. They had a clear direction before their eyes. Despite the temptation to follow the firm, smooth road, they continued through the trees, keeping the highway in sight. The experience the wanderers had acquired during their survival told them that in their situation, stealth, caution, and secrecy were their greatest assets. Another hour passed, and darkness was rapidly descending. There was no shelter to be found, and spending the night in the open was definitely not an option. Max ventured out onto the highway from time to time for reconnaissance, and after each foray, he returned with good news. There's a car parked on the side of the road ahead, about 300 or 400 meters away. I watched for a while, but there was no traffic around it. We need to scout it out. There might be an ambush and the car is bait. Let's comb this side first, then the other, so the three of us don't get separated, Vorobyov suggested. Okay. Girls, wait here then. Here's your comm. Don't make any unnecessary noise. Andre handed the radio to Katya. The guys slowly and cautiously made their way through the forest until they reached the truck. The trees made it difficult to tell if anyone was inside. At least there was no one hiding on this side of the road, which was a relief. The friends walked forward a couple 100 meters, then quickly crossed the highway and headed back. Having confirmed there was no ambush, Andre, Ivan, and Max finally approached the truck itself. An old Japanese diesel truck with the logo of some small transport company sat forlornly on the side of the road. The driver's door was ajar, and Sova climbed behind the wheel and inspected the glove compartment. But he found nothing but a few sheets of paper, a lighter, a bag of sunflower seeds, an old tablet with a dead battery, a pencil, and a couple of condoms. There are no keys, the teenager announced with annoyance. Meanwhile, Vorobyov raised the hood. If I have gas and the battery is working, I'll try to start this dinosaur tomorrow morning. It's almost night. I don't want to mess around in the dark. I think it's a dead end, Andre said, squinting skeptically. Why would a driver abandon a perfectly good car here in the middle of nowhere? Did he decide to take a walk? Or pick mushrooms in the forest? I think we're looking at a mobile home. He could have developed a fever on the road. The driver felt ill, stopped, decided to rest, fell asleep, turned into a monster, woke up, and went looking for someone to devour. Well, at least we can spend the night here. 4 people can fit in the back, 1 in the cab, and a 6th on duty, Owl reasoned matter-of-factly, walking around the truck. Vorobyov lightly nudged Kuznetsov in the ribs with his elbow. Andrei, stay strong. Be positive, man. Max's hypothesis is perfectly valid. Call the girls. Tell them to join in. The scientist raised the radio to his mouth. Lady, come out onto the road. We're waiting for you by the car. Over. Okay, we understand. Katya's voice rang out after the hissing. Max, meanwhile, knocked on the body. Let's open it up. Maybe there's something valuable in there. The car was used for cargo transportation, after all. I'll take care of the door, and you close it, in case some creature jumps out from there, said Vorobyov, and began to pull back the bolts. But instead of the creature, the friends saw a multitude of boxes and packages, neatly stacked on top of each other. Just like presents under the tree. And it's all ours, Max rejoiced, looking at the wealth he'd received. At that moment, the girls arrived, and the friends all began sorting through the loot. There were clothes, shoes, toys, a bunch of car parts, a set of saucepans, electronics, and a ton of other useful and useless junk. Lena stumbled upon a box containing a set of gold earrings, a ring, and an emerald necklace. Katya found a beautiful gold chain with a pendant. Wow, these trinkets must have cost a lot of money back then, Ivan said, looking at the jewelry. They're still worth a lot, or will be when the situation settles down. Those who survive will eventually start establishing contacts, trading, bartering, and some kind of monetary equivalent will be needed for settlements. Gold will be that. It's eternally valuable. Kuznetsov shared his thoughts, tearing open another box. And for me, these are real treasures, the cosmonaut smiled, pulling on his new dry sneakers. I've never ordered shoes online, but these were on their way to someone else, and they fit me perfectly. At that moment, Masha's stomach began to rumble pitifully. It's a pity there's nothing to eat. We could really use a box of stewed meat or canned goods right now. Yeah, food's a problem. But at least we found a roof over our heads for the night. Maybe we'll get lucky with groceries tomorrow, Owl replied optimistically. They decided not to light a fire. There was nothing to cook anyway, and the evening was warm. Most of the boxes were thrown to the side of the road to make room in the back for the night. They decided to work in pairs. The Vorobyevs took the first shift, Andrei and Katya took the middle of the night, and the Savelyevs took the pre-dawn watch. The night passed peacefully, but in the morning, Masha was awakened by a frequent thumping on the roof. She opened the door and peered outside. The rain was pouring down, huge puddles bubbling on the sides of the road. It's pouring quite well. Andrei's sleepy muttering came from the darkness of the truck. Yeah, I wish we could be sitting happily under the trees now, Katya added and yawned sweetly. His friends' voices woke Ivan. He sat up, then lightly punched the wall separating the cab and the truck bed. Hey, morning watch. Are you awake? We're sleeping. Can't you hear Lenka snoring? Max's muffled voice replied. Are there any clearings on the horizon? The scientist asked lazily. No, it's deaf. Everything is covered with clouds. Oh, my guts are already pounding. Lying around like this is great, sure, but not on an empty stomach. Vorobyov sighed, stretching his stiff back and neck. Masha gently stroked his hand. Sleep some more. You're not so hungry when you're sleeping. That's a good idea, especially since there are no other options, the husband agreed and lay down on his side. Closer to lunchtime, the rain stopped, and breaks appeared in the gray shroud of clouds, through which a clear blue sky could be seen. Ivan's first move was to reach under the hood. Andrei and Max assisted him as best they could, through combined effort, trial and error, and a fair amount of cursing, the friends finally managed to get the truck started. The fuel gauge showed just under a quarter of a tank, but the important thing was that the car was running smoothly. "We're back on wheels," Vorobyov announced triumphantly. "Eee!" The girls clapped in unison, applauding the cosmonaut. Max recalled the burnt-out RGR with a slight sadness. Not our favorite monster, but it's still better than walking." "Let's not waste time. Let's go find food," Andrei shouted, climbing into the passenger seat. Ivan took the wheel, and the others had to squeeze into the dark back of the truck. The truck, its engine rumbling, rolled briskly along the wet asphalt. Chapter 68. The Prisoner. It was Tanya and Albert Borisovich's second day in the village.
The professor was still under guard, chained to his bed. He hadn't seen Tanya since the previous evening, when she dropped by for just 10 minutes to bring him dinner. They'd chatted briefly. The girl had been reluctant to leave but had to. Kaimovich realized someone very powerful was controlling the little girl. She looked intimidated, and this worried him greatly. Instead of Tanya, a sullen, silent man brought food that morning. He unfastened the handcuff, waited for the professor to use the restroom, fastened it again, left the breakfast, and left. The hours of solitude dragged on. Lunchtime was approaching, and Albert Borisovich hoped that Tanya would come this time. He already missed her, and besides, he was sick of lying on his bed like a log. His wounds were healing surprisingly quickly, his body was recovering, and Kaimovich felt ready to continue his journey tomorrow. The scientist couldn't see what was happening outside. His house had 2 windows, but the trees next to them blocked almost all visibility with their foliage. Finally, an hour later, the door creaked, and the professor immediately recognized Tanya's light footsteps. The girl was carefully carrying a tray with a mug of strong tea, a plate of boiled potatoes, and a bunch of green onions. Kaimovich was delighted and sat down on the bed. He had already adapted to eating with his handcuffed arm and was munching on new potatoes and onions with gusto. "Why didn't you come this morning? Didn't they let you go?" "Yes," Tanya nodded, swinging her legs on the next bed. "Is this still that old woman?" "She, Baba Zina. In the morning we cleaned and washed the floors in the houses." "And you washed it?" The professor almost choked on what he heard. "Yes, and I wiped the dust." The little girl sighed tiredly. "Do they have a child labor camp here or something?" Suddenly Tanya couldn't hold back. She blushed and started crying. "When are we leaving? I don't like it here at all." "Hush, hush," the mentor tried to calm her down. "We'll go. We definitely will. Their leader should be back today. I'll talk to him, and I hope we'll be gone tomorrow." The girl sobbed a few more times, then wiped her tears with her sleeve and said, "Dodge's uncles and 2 other dogs took them somewhere this morning, but they recently returned." Albert Borisovich didn't answer, but his intuition told him that he needed to get out of this place as quickly as possible. "That's it, I have to go. Baba Zina said I had 10 minutes and timed it. I'll pick up the tray this evening. Please, let's leave here tomorrow." Kaimovich swallowed the piece with difficulty, feeling that he was ready to strangle this warden, Baba Zina. "I really want that too. Behave well. I'll be waiting for you this evening." 3 hours had passed since Tanya's departure. The professor was tossing and turning on his bed. Suddenly the door swung open, and the sound of heavy boots was heard. From the sound, the scientist realized a whole group was approaching. He heard Dr. Makarik's voice. "Here is the girl's father. By the way, what is your name?"
Albert, Kaimovich answered, rising from the bed. Besides the big doctor, two more guests arrived. The first was a stocky, one-armed man with a red, bristly beard, and the second was a tall, thin stranger with a hooked nose. "So, how are you feeling, Albert?" Makarik asked. His comrades were in no hurry to introduce themselves. "Much better. The pain is less. My temperature is normal. Honestly, I'm tired of lying around doing nothing." "You'll find something to do, don't worry. No one here is out of work," the one-armed man chuckled. Albert Borisovich frowned slightly, remembering how they were loading Tanya. Then the scientist looked at the thin man with the hooked nose, who stood slightly behind the others and stared intently at Kaimovich. The professor didn't like that sharp, cold, heavy gaze. Something about his face unsettled the scientist. When they brought him here, he was covered in bites, barely breathing. And now he's as fit as a fiddle. It's a miracle. "Let me see the stitches." Makarik inspected the wounds and was amazed at how quickly they were healing. "When can I talk to the boss?" the professor asked, trying to sound friendly. "Everything in its time. Rest for now. The stitches will dissolve on their own. There won't be any need to remove them." The doctor folded his powerful arms over his chest and stepped away from the bed. A few seconds later, the three of them silently walked outside. They must have had a council here or something. They came, looked, and left. "Where's that damn Raven or Berkut or whatever his name is?" Albert Borisovich wondered irritably. But the boss was in no hurry to honor him with a visit. Tanya came late in the evening, brought dinner and collapsed onto the next bed. "What's wrong with you? Are you feeling unwell?" Kaimovich asked, alarmed. "I'm very tired. We were watering the garden, my back and legs hurt," the little girl answered quietly. "A vegetable garden. A vegetable garden. I see. Are there a lot of guards here?" the mentor asked casually. "2, maybe 3 people," the girl answered after a moment's thought, and then added, "Dodge whines so much in his cage when he sees me. I went up to him 3 times today and petted him. He's being kept separately. I told him you'd get better soon and we'd move on. He misses you." Yes, that's how it will be. Everything will be fine soon," the professor promised again, though he himself was already having trouble believing it. There was no electricity in the house, and Kaimovich ate by touch in almost complete darkness. Soon, Tanya quietly said goodbye and left almost silently. Albert Borisovich was left alone again, preparing for bed. He hadn't been able to speak with the chief that day, and the scientist postponed his hopes of being released until the following day. The professor rolled over onto his side. The bed creaked. Dogs barked outside. A hoarse male voice shouted at them. And then everything went silent again. Footsteps sounded somewhere nearby, and Kaimovich imagined a guard pacing around his little house. The footsteps grew louder. A brief scraping sound was heard, and the room instantly lit up. Albert Borisovich even closed his eyes in surprise and turned toward the exit. The stranger stood at the threshold for a few seconds, then walked toward the prisoner's bed. This was the same tall, thin guest with the hooked nose who had come in during the day with the doctor and the one-armed man. He slowly approached the scientist and placed a light bomb on the bed next to him. Kaimovich had seen this contraption several times. A transparent, sealed flask, about 1/2 meter long, contained a special powder that absorbed sunlight during the day and converted it into light energy at night. A small piezoelectric element, similar to those used in lighters, was embedded in the bomb. When a button on the handle was pressed, the piezoelectric element activated the charged powder, causing it to glow for a short time. Good evening, the professor greeted him reservedly, sensing something bad was about to happen. It's a nice evening, warm. The sun just set behind a cloud. It'll probably rain tomorrow, the stranger answered calmly, walking around the house. Albert Borisovich watched this strange fellow cautiously, trying to guess the purpose of his visit. Did he come to talk about the weather or something just before bed? What does he want from me? Is he up to something? No wonder I didn't like his mug right away. The scientist sat down on the bed, and the guest continued to walk near the far wall. Didn't recognize me? I didn't recognize you either, until I heard your name. Albert, it's a rare name. It immediately struck me as odd. I've known 3 Alberts in my life. The first was my cousin, but he was much younger than you. The second is already dead, I know that for sure. And the third. I didn't know the third Albert for long, but I remember him very well. His name was Albert Borisovich, and he worked in the Novosibirsk laboratory. Listening to this story, Kaimovich felt a prickly chill run down his spine. He tried to make out the stranger's face, but he had retreated into the room, and the light from the saber cast poor light. The faces of acquaintances and colleagues flashed through the scientist's mind, but he couldn't recall anyone resembling this one. I have a good memory for 2 things: names and faces. The mysterious guest continued his monologue. You've changed. I barely recognized you. What a surprising encounter. I didn't think such a thing was possible. You won't believe it, but I even dreamed about you recently. I often have nightmares. I see you're tormented by the question, who am I? Yes, I don't remember. The prisoner squeezed out with difficulty. Why did you decide to leave Novosibirsk? An epidemic, infected. The city is swarming with zombies, plus bandits. We're looking for a safe place away from people. So who are you? Where did we meet? Albert Borisovich tried to pick up the thread of the conversation. The interlocutor ignored his question. We? Oh yeah, you're with your daughter. You're lucky, few people here have family left. My boy was supposed to be 15 this fall, but it looks like I won't see him again. Many have become infected, but not all. There is a chance. The professor tried to carefully encourage him. The stranger suddenly approached Kaimovich, pushed him onto the bed and squeezed the scientist's throat as if in a vice. It's because of freaks like you that all this bullshit happened. Because of people like you, bitch. Do you want to know where you saw me? And do you remember this? The guest turned his back and pulled the hair on the back of his head, revealing a small scar. Albert Borisovich didn't answer. He realized his chances of surviving the night were slim to none. Now do you know? Yes, I was a guinea pig in your experiments. They injected me with some crap, then treated me. They thought I'd die, but I survived. Then they transferred me to a colony not far from here. By the time this plague reached us, the big cities were already in total disarray. At the slightest suspicion, for a single sneeze, prisoners were simply taken from their cells and shot. Nobody said anything to us, and one morning the Godfather and all the guards simply disappeared. They got in and drove off, and left us in our cells to die as if we were walled up alive. They left in a hurry, even abandoning some of the weapons. Makarek helped out. He was the only one from the entire administration left. He didn't really have anywhere to go. He was from an orphanage. When anarchy set in, the criminal underworld started squabbling among ourselves about what to do next. And the guys and I grabbed a couple of machine guns and headed for the woods. Makarek went with us. Then we found this place and ran into some local villagers. They told us all about the plague and how people were eating each other. By the end of the story, The prisoner's tone had become calm and phlegmatic, as if he hadn't even tried to strangle Kaimovich a minute ago. The former prisoner, a test subject, stepped away from the scientist's bed again and began coughing loudly into his fist. Now, Albert Borisovich, with difficulty, still recognized him as one of the unwitting participants in the biochip project. Back then, the professor hadn't cared much about the fates of these people, treating them like ordinary lab rats. After implanting the chip, many were indeed injected with various viruses: fever, typhoid, rabies, influenza, hepatitis. Then, they tested how accurately the device transmitted information about the body's condition. They assigned me the number K134 and kept me in your casemates for 2 months. I nearly kicked the bucket there. And then, when I recovered, they transferred me to these parts. As far as I remember, you were the most important one there. You walked around, gave directions, showed who and what to inject. You treated many to death back then. I was simply carrying out the assigned tasks. There was a federal scientific program underway to develop medical biochips. If it hadn't been me, someone else would have done it. These advanced technologies allowed, but the guest only grinned and interrupted the prisoner. Well, yeah, we live in a fucking progressive way now. And it's all thanks to people like you. This didn't just happen out of nowhere, did it? Those smart guys made some virus, the experiment got out of control, and we're still left cleaning up your experiments. The stranger, indirectly blaming Kaimovich for the epidemic, had no idea how right he was. The professor fell silent, knowing that one more careless word and he would be killed on the spot. Old scores would be settled. He needed to act more cunningly, buy himself time, and wait for a conversation with the leader of their commune. Only in that did he see his chance. Meanwhile, the former prisoner moved his saber aside and sat down on the bed opposite the scientist. Albert Borisovich asked cautiously, "You said you had a son. As far as I know, the lab only took in prisoners who had no relatives. It's not written down anywhere that I have children. I found out about Mishka myself when he was already 5 years old. By chance, when I ran into my ex-wife, Alenka, with him on the street. She was already married, had a family and everything, but she let me see the boy, and I'm grateful for that. And your chief, Berkut, is he also from the zone?" "Also," the stranger confirmed, picking up the flare, which was already beginning to fade. He clicked the button on the handle and the room brightened. "Okay, don't be afraid. I'm not going to cut you while you're chained up. As they say, let bygones be bygones." The guest winked at the professor, a sly, sinister smile tugging at his lips. The man coughed again and headed for the door. "Stop! Stop! How am I supposed to talk to Berkut?" Kaimovich shouted after him. "Why do you need him? He's already been told about you and the girl. He knows. Berkut rarely holds personal audiences." "Wait. Peep. Tell him we're of little use as prisoners. Take whatever you want. Just let Tanya and me go. It'll be better for everyone, believe me." The scientist's voice trembled and broke, almost begging for mercy. "We've already got everything we need. Your dog guards the camp. The little one helps the women with the housework, and we'll put you to work. We'll find something for you. Well, if you insist, we might kill you. But generally we value human life, unlike your lab. So be grateful we didn't let you get eaten, and we nursed you back to health." And we'll also share a piece of bread and a roof over your head with you. Albert Borisovich felt a nervous tremor rising from his legs. He sat chained like a dog, his life controlled by a former prisoner. At the threshold, the interlocutor with the hooked nose stopped and reluctantly turned around. If anything, Berkut is me. Welcome to our society. We're strict here, but fair. Pull any stunts and we'll bury you in the forest. Good night, Albert. Chapter 69. Fat Dew. On the east coast of Australia, in the small town of Tweed Heads, a group of survivors prepared for another day. 7 people found shelter in a small hotel overlooking the Tweed River, at the mouth of which the town stood. At its peak, the town had a population of about 10,000, but after the epidemic, no more than 100 remained. Conflicts between the surviving residents of the town were virtually non-existent. There was plenty of available housing, as well as fresh water, food supplies, and, for now, medicine. Furthermore, the warm waters of the Coral Sea lapped nearby, providing a rich supply of fish for anyone who wanted it. Rob Taylor, the former owner of a small auto repair shop, became the leader of the rock-and-roll Tweed motel community. He was already over 50 and missing 2 fingers on his right hand, but that didn't stop him from wielding a massive hammer and smashing zombie skulls. There are almost no firearms left in the city. The local police station's small arsenal was quickly depleted as the epidemic began to gain momentum. A few brave souls decided to go to Southport, the nearest town where there were a couple of gun shops, but none of them returned. Rob Taylor stepped out onto the terrace and looked at the pool, where the water had already begun to bloom. The hotel grounds were surrounded by a high brick fence, which served as a reliable barrier against cannibals. The area was generally peaceful. A minute later, Olga, a student from Ukraine, appeared on the terrace. She had arrived in Australia in the spring on the work and travel program and knew she wouldn't be returning home. Rob had saved her when she was nearly eaten by 4 cannibals on the street, and now he was caring for her. Soon after the outbreak, several more people joined them. Ruth was a 50-year-old African-American woman who worked in human resources at the local port. Hector was a thin man who had worked as an accountant before the pandemic. He was already in his 30s, but he looked more like a senior. Ilan was a 15-year-old whose father had previously fished on his own small boat. These people had lost all their loved ones. Everyone except Lori, who wasn't alone. Lori had recently turned 20, born in Australia, though her mother was from New Zealand, and her father an immigrant from Indonesia. At 18, Lori began dating a college boyfriend and soon became pregnant. But her boyfriend, unwilling to become a young father, left to study in Canada. Lori gave birth to a boy and named him Tim. When the virus reached Australia's east coast, Lori's parents and friends died. But her 10-month-old son miraculously survived. Each member of this group had their own story about how they received a rabies vaccine. But little Tim survived without the vaccine. His mother breastfed him, and so the infant's immune system proved stronger than the Nova virus. The baby became the primary focus of care and concern in this small community. He seemed to represent the future that would come when the epidemic was over. His plump, rosy cheeks and cheerful laughter somewhat eased the grief of losing hundreds of loved ones in such a short time. Olga walked barefoot to the pool and touched the water. "We can set up a laundry here. No one will want to swim here anyway." Rob nodded and looked thoughtfully at the approaching clouds. "It might rain. You need to put empty containers in the yard. There is no such thing as too much fresh water. Lori said yesterday that we're running low on diapers, and she and the others need a lot of other things. We need to make another trip to replenish our supplies. We'll have to go to the outskirts through the entire center.
Everything in the area has already been stolen, and there's no guarantee there's anything left," Rob replied without enthusiasm. The girl sat on the edge of the pool and lowered her feet into it. "But we can't sit still either. We need to find resources. Maybe we should team up with someone. We're safe here for now. The longer we can hold out here without attracting attention, the fewer cannibals there will be around. They'll leave or die, and then it'll be easier to find resources. Or someone else will seize these resources first. If we don't have anything valuable in return, I don't think they'll be willing to share with us," Olga countered, squinting in the sun. "We're not going anywhere today. We'll see tomorrow," Taylor replied categorically. Ruth appeared at the hotel door and yawned widely. "What are we arguing about?" "About the value of time. About how the best action is sometimes inaction," Rob remarked philosophically. "Well said, but you can't make breakfast by sitting around, and I'm already hungry. I'll go see what else we have left." The African-American woman stretched, loosened her back, and headed to the kitchen. Olga looked after her, and then turned her gaze to Rob. "Ruth is right. You can't live on inaction. You know what I mean. As long as we're well-fed, alive, and relatively safe. As long as all my decisions are justified. Agree? Ruth, Lori, and the others trust me, and I'm responsible for them. Roby, no one's arguing. You saved and helped us all. You're our wise leader. We respect and appreciate you very much. But look around. We're not in Melbourne. There aren't many shops, supermarkets, pharmacies, or other useful establishments in Tweed Heads. All the survivors are scavenging for whatever's lying around, while we're sitting behind the fence. And they die. Did you see how they tore a guy and a girl apart yesterday on the neighboring street? I didn't see it, and I was sitting on the roof and watching it. We couldn't have helped them. The guys were surrounded by about 30 zombies. They were eaten alive, like piranhas eat a cow that foolishly walks into the wrong river. We have to go at night, when they freeze, Olga persisted. Rob scratched the gray stubble on his neck. There's enough food and water for at least a week, if you don't feast and spend it sparingly. In about 3 days, we can think about setting out. That was the end of the conversation. The rest of the group had already woken up and headed out onto the terrace, where, as was tradition, everyone had breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Only Lori and little Tim remained in their room. The young mother and her baby arrived just in time for the meal and let the baby crawl onto the terrace, where a special playpen had been set up for him. Lori was a pretty, petite woman with brown hair and a bob cut. She had the ability to appeal to both men and women. She quickly became part of any group, and thanks to her charm, soft voice, and ability to find common ground, she could immediately make friends with strangers. Lori exuded a special, warm energy. People were drawn to her. The young mother said the traditional good morning, took her seat at the table, and began listening to the conversation. Lori didn't speak much, but when she did, she was always heard to the end and not interrupted. She had a talent for bringing people together and diffusing tension in conversation. After breakfast, everyone lounged peacefully on sun loungers near the pool in the shade of large umbrellas. From the outside, it might have looked like tourists chilling out on vacation. Feeling safe, they relaxed under the protection of a high, sturdy fence. Hector looked up at the sky and frowned anxiously. Black smoke, another fire somewhere. It's from the port side. I'll climb up to the roof and see what's there, said Rob, getting to his feet. Elon immediately jumped off the lounger. I'm with you, Mr. Taylor. I want to see it too. After the infection and his father's death, the boy became attached to Rob, who supported him as best he could. Elon grew up a cheerful and sociable teenager,
needing to constantly keep busy to avoid dwelling on the horrors that had befallen him recently. At that moment, Tim burst into tears in his playpen. Laurie walked lightly over to the baby and picked him up. The infant immediately began happily playing with her wooden earrings. "Maybe we should play Monopoly." Olga didn't have time to finish her sentence. Suddenly, there was a loud bang, the gates swung open, and a large truck barreled into the hotel grounds. The vehicle knocked over the sun loungers and crashed into the pool. Water splashed over the side, washing away the pool of blood where Ruth had lain a second ago. Hector was sitting slightly to the right, and that saved his life. The truck didn't crush him, but rather threw him sideways. When he fell, the accountant awkwardly extended his arm and broke his forearm. It all happened so quickly that for a few seconds people sat in a stupor, from which they were brought out by Rob's cry. "To the gate, quickly! Block the entrance!" Taylor was just climbing onto the roof when a truck rammed their gate. He heard the crash, and along with Ilan rushed to the others. Hector was writhing on the floor, clutching his broken arm to his chest. Laurie grabbed Tim and ran into the hotel with him, and Ruth's mutilated body was floating in the pool. Olga pressed herself against the wall, looking around in fear. She was in shock and didn't immediately hear Rob's voice. "Olya, help us! Don't stand there, come here!" Finally, she came to her senses and rushed to help. The left gate was hanging by one hinge. The right one had been torn off and was lying on the terrace. Rob, Ilan, and Olga struggled to lift it and block part of the passage. Then they used sun loungers, deck chairs, and hotel furniture. Leaving the baby in the crib, Laurie returned to the street and began helping the others. People had hastily erected a barricade where the gate had been. Only then did Rob begin to inspect the scene. The truck was half submerged in the pool. The driver's bloody body was in the cab. No one could figure out why this man had rammed their gate. One thing was certain. They needed to leave immediately and find a new refuge. "Hector, how are you?" Laurie leaned over the former accountant, who continued to cry and moan in pain. The guy showed her his hand and the girl winced in fear. "Oh, you have an open fracture, but the artery doesn't seem to be torn. I'll get the first aid kit." The wounded man screamed and twitched so much that Taylor and Ilan had to hold him down. Laurie supervised the operation, injecting Hector with painkillers, treating the wound with antiseptic, then applying a tourniquet just above his elbow and saying, "Elle, look at your watch. Remember what time it is. Let me know in an hour. I'll loosen the tourniquet so his tissue doesn't have time to die." "Okay," the teenager replied, holding the wounded man's legs. The girl wet a clean towel with warm water and covered the bone with a soft bandage. Then she applied a splint and carefully wrapped a second towel over it. "Well done, Laurie. Where did you learn that?" Rob asked. "I took a first aid course and that came in handy. But I don't know how to set a bone. You need a real doctor for that." At that moment, someone hit the barricade from the street. "They're already here." Ilan stared fearfully towards the broken gate. "They heard the noise and are now looking for a way to get to us," Olga whispered. Taylor spoke quickly in a low voice. "Pack enough food and water for 3 days and grab some knives from the kitchen. We need to leave as quickly as possible." "Maybe we should wait until evening, when they're more sluggish," the teenager suggested. Rob sniffed the air, the smoke from the fire in the port reaching them. "The barricade might not hold until evening. We need to leave now, before they gather here from all over the area." 15 minutes later, everyone was ready. Laurie held Tim. Olga and Ilan carried the bags of food and supplies. Hector, as he was seriously injured, was relieved of the burden. Rob slung his backpack over his shoulders and armed himself with his hefty hammer and meat cleaver. Mr. Taylor looked at Ruth's mangled body in the pool. The truck had crushed her head and torn half off one arm. She died instantly. There was no time for a funeral, so they had to leave Ruth as she was, right there in the water. At the very moment the car rammed the hotel gates. A few blocks to the west, Fat Dew stopped in front of the plate glass window of an insurance company. He was a massive man, nearly 6 feet tall, with a huge round head topped with short red hair. Dark freckles covered his entire face, neck, and arms. One nostril of his fleshy nose was torn and a shard of glass protruded from his right cheek. His short, fat neck seemed to grow straight out of the back of his head, and his head lay almost flat on his shoulders. The nickname Fatty stuck with Dew at the age of 10, and from then on, almost everyone called him that, including his friends and even his parents. Despite his enormous size and immense strength, Dew grew up a very cowardly and weak-willed boy. At school and college, he was known as a perpetual loser and the butt of jokes. After completing his education, Dew decided to leave his native Leeds, England, for a place where no one knew him and start over. After traveling around Europe for a while, the guy first moved to the United States, then to Australia. There, he traveled along the East Coast and earned a living as a web designer. The epidemic struck Dew in Tweed Heads, just as he was planning to move to one of the islands of New Caledonia. But the virus interfered with his plans. Since then, Fat Dew has been wandering from one neighborhood to another, searching for prey. In the last 2 weeks, he'd lost 40 kilograms, but still seemed enormous. The virus had changed him not only physically, but also mentally. There was no trace of the former insecure, and cowardly man. Now he was a ferocious and cunning creature that feared nothing. Fat Dew easily scattered his fellows in the fight for meat and blood. He was a slow runner, so he adopted a different tactic. Dew always walked alone, keeping other infected at bay while trying to keep small groups of infected in sight. As soon as the fat zombie noticed one of his fellows catching prey, he would immediately join in the feast. If they resisted, Dew would snap the hunters' necks and take their trophies whole. While Fat Dew was leisurely admiring his reflection in the mirrored window of an office building, a truck managed to knock down the gate, crush Ruth under its wheels, and crash into the pool. The big guy heard the noise but didn't rush to the scene. Dew slowly made his way toward the hotel, observing the behavior of the other zombies on the streets. While most of the infected huddled at the barricade, Rob, Ilan, Olga, Hector, and Lori, carrying Tim, walked into the backyard and carefully made their way out through the second exit onto the adjacent street. They hoped to find shelter nearby, but no suitable options were available. Maybe to the port? There's a group of survivors there. I think they have a pastor as their leader, Olga suggested. Yes, but they mostly come out at night. That area is full of zombies. It's impossible to get to them. Better to go to the warehouses on the outskirts. Follow me, Rob answered and headed northwest. But 10 minutes later, a crowd of infected blocked their path, forcing them to abruptly change route. They managed to escape their pursuers by running, but found themselves in open space. The infected appeared again. Straining every ounce of their strength, the friends ran after their leader. But soon, Lori and the wounded Hector began to fall behind. The group hid behind a minibus to catch their breath. Rob ran through his options in his head and watched the crowd of cannibals milling about at the intersection ahead. They didn't notice us, but they don't want to disperse either. Something is attracting them there, Taylor grumbled, turning to the others. Ilan peered cautiously out from behind the hood. We can turn onto that alley. We won't make it. Hector and Lori are tired. we need to run as fast as we can. There's another plan. See that fitness center across the street? Wait there, I'll leave you my backpack and go light. When I find a suitable shelter, I'll come back for you. They won't catch me alone, but with a child and a wounded man, we're vulnerable. Rob outlined his idea. Despite being over 50, Mr. Taylor was in excellent shape. In his youth, Rob was an avid track and field athlete and, before the pandemic, frequently participated in numerous amateur marathons. I'll go with you. I'm third in school in running. I definitely won't fall behind, and I'll back you up if anything happens, insisted young Ilan. Suddenly, little Tim began to whine pitifully. His crying became louder and louder, and Lori could not calm the child down. Taylor realized he had to act immediately. He carefully crossed the road and began fiddling with the fitness center door. 5 minutes later, the man broke it down and disappeared inside. Ilan followed. They soon returned to the minivan. There's no one there, though I smashed the lock and it doesn't work now. We need to lock the door with something. It's a shame it opens both ways. Rob reported the situation. By this time, little Tim had calmed down a bit and was greedily devouring fruit puree from a tube. The group quickly discussed their next steps and split up. Olga, Hector, and Lori hid with the baby in the fitness center, while Rob and Ilan ran to find a new hiding place. Just as Hector was closing the door, Fat Dew turned onto the same street. The wounded man didn't see him, but the zombie noticed the movement and, puffing, headed toward the fitness center. The big guy walked down the deserted street. Rob and Ilan had already fled, attracting and leading cannibals from all over the block. Hector, keep an eye on the entrance for now. I'll try moving this thing. We need to lock the door, Olga said, leaning against the refrigerator that used to hold water and sports drinks. Right now, wait. The guy didn't have time to finish the sentence and froze, watching as a huge zombie approached the door. Fat Dew kicked the door open and burst inside. As soon as he spotted his prey, his usual slowness seemed to evaporate. With the speed of a hungry bear, he lunged at Hector and tackled him to the floor. The accountant, with his broken arm, was left completely helpless. The fat man used his favorite technique and, with a single movement, snapped the injured man's neck. But Olga and Lori didn't see it. Dew burst in with such a roar that the girls thought a whole horde of cannibals had broken in. Panicked, the friends ran in different directions, so terrified that they didn't even try to fight back. Olga locked herself in the restroom, while Lori and the baby found themselves in the cardio room. The door wasn't locked, and Olga, clutching her son to her chest, frantically searched for a place to hide. She spotted several spherical exercise machines and headed toward them. They were egg-shaped and about 2.5 meters tall. Inside each egg was a stationary bike or treadmill. When a person entered the sphere, a virtual reality program was activated. An internal screen could project hundreds of exercise locations. You could choose between a gentle jog along a forest trail or a professional cycling workout in the mountains. The egg created a special microclimate and sound environment for complete immersion. Lori and Tim found themselves in such a sphere. They found themselves in a small, dark, stuffy room. Without electricity, the sphere's air conditioning system didn't work, and Lori had to open the door every now and then to avoid suffocation. Meanwhile, Fat Dew calmly stuffed his bottomless stomach with Hector's warm flesh. A huge pool of blood had already formed on the floor, which the zombie licked up from time to time, smacking his lips with relish. The cannibal had no plans to leave the corpse until he'd stripped it to the bone. About half an hour passed. Dew had eaten his fill, and he collapsed on the floor nearby. He was almost asleep, his senses dulled, and he even began to snore. Suddenly, a strange, tantalizing sound caught Du's ear. It sounded like someone was moaning or asking for help. A semblance of curiosity stirred in the zombie's mind. He stood up and slowly turned his head, trying to figure out where the sound was coming from. Finally, the cannibal caught the direction and swaggered forward. He crossed the weight training room, turned past the martial arts section, and stopped at the entrance to the cardio area. The tantalizing sound grew louder, and Du began sniffing around, searching for its source. He couldn't see the people, but he sensed their presence nearby. Meanwhile, tears of despair streamed down Laurie's cheeks. Her 10-month-old baby, Tim, was screaming at the top of his lungs and wouldn't stop. She had to clamp her hand over his mouth to muffle his cries. But this only made the child's hysteria worse. He kicked his legs, writhed his whole body, and screamed and screamed and screamed. She was afraid of strangling her son, but she was equally afraid of the zombies getting them. Du stopped half a meter from the sphere. He looked at the egg with disbelief, as if assessing its strength. Then the cannibal pushed the sphere with his hand, but the shell held. Suddenly, the baby's cries grew louder. Laurie let go of Tim and began holding the door from the inside with both hands. To her horror, it didn't lock. Du scratched the egg with his nails, pushed it with his shoulder, and then slammed his fist into it. Laurie felt like someone had struck it with a sledgehammer from outside. The noise silenced even Tim for a second. Meanwhile, the fat man grew increasingly enraged. He realized his prey was hiding inside, and he began to smash the sphere with all his might. The hull was already cracking under his blows, and Laurie knew they were doomed. Suddenly, Du swayed and fell sideways. He was so engrossed in cracking the egg that he didn't notice Olga sneaking up behind him. She grabbed a dumbbell and slammed it into the zombie's head with all her might. "Laurie! Laurie, come on, hurry up, we need to get out of here," Olga shouted to her friend. The girl opened the door slightly and almost climbed out of the sphere. But at that moment, Du rose up. Olga swung again, aiming for her temple, but the cannibal deflected his head at the last moment, and the blow landed on her shoulder. The fat man barely felt any pain, but rage boiled his blood. He lunged at Olga, who stumbled back, raising the dumbbell over her head, when she tripped on the machine and fell. Du didn't let her rise. With one blow, he broke her nose, knocked her unconscious, grabbed her head in his huge hands, and began gouging out her eyes. In less than a minute, it was all over. Olga's body convulsed several times in a death throe, then suddenly stretched out and lay motionless on the floor. Laurie no longer saw it. She knew she couldn't save her friend. She hoped only that the monster would finally eat its fill and forget about her and the baby. Du sniffed Olga's corpse, licked his thumbs, which he had used to gouge out her eyes, and turned to the sphere. Little Tim was no longer crying, only whimpering pitifully. But the cannibal heard him. The fat man began cracking the egg again, his hunter's passion growing ever stronger. About an hour had passed since Rob and Elon had gone looking for shelter and separated from the others. They returned to the fitness center doors, and Mr. Taylor stepped through the threshold to see Hector's remains on the floor.
Oh God, no! They've been found!"
The boy's sobbing was heard behind him. "Elle, wait here and watch the street. Rob heard a quiet, mournful groan, quickly but cautiously followed the sound, and saw Olga's mutilated, dead body in the cardio area. 5 steps away, a huge zombie sat gnawing on something on the floor. The infected's body obscured the victim, who was still struggling. A moment later, there was a crunching sound as Rob's hammer crashed down on the back of Dew's head. The fat man wheezed and managed to turn, but a second blow knocked him out cold. The fat man lay flat on his back, his skull fractured. To make sure, Taylor slit his throat and plunged a knife into his heart. With trembling hands, Rob bent over Lori's bloody, battered body. She was lying on her stomach, the baby nowhere in sight. Taylor gently touched the girl's shoulder and noticed a lacerated wound on her neck, from which blood was slowly seeping. "Hold on, girl, hold on. I'll help you now." The man tore his t-shirt and bandaged the bite. "This is bad. Looks like he's cut a vein," Rob thought, but said nothing. He lifted Lori and only then saw that little Tim was lying motionless beneath her. Fat Dew spent a long time breaking the sphere, and finally, when it began to fall apart, Lori opened the door, clutched her son to her, and tried to escape. The zombie managed to grab the girl by the hair, and she fell, covering the child with her body. The infected bit her, showered her with blows, and ate her alive. But the mother continued to protect the baby, covering him with her body like a human shield. Soon, Tim began to choke and lost consciousness, but Lori held on until the end. "Elon, come here," Taylor shouted. There was a thud, and the teenager screamed and stopped next to Olga's body. "No, no." "Don't hesitate, boy. You can't help her anymore. But we can still save the others." Rob carefully handed little Tim to the teenager.
He's covered in blood.
The boy's voice trembled with fear and grief. "That's not his blood. The baby's fine. Gently pat his cheeks. Find some smelling salts in our first aid kit. And don't forget to watch the entrance." Taylor began to examine Lori. Her left ear was half bitten off. A huge hematoma had swollen from her temple to her right eye. Dozens of bites were bleeding all over her body. But the main thing was that she was still breathing. Besides the wound on her neck, Rob found no other injuries that could have threatened the girl's life. Fat Dew had tormented his victim slowly. He wasn't hungry yet, and was enjoying the process, listening to Lori's moans and screams. The zombie wanted to toy with his defenseless prey before breaking her neck. Elon held the bottle of ammonia to Lori's face, and the girl shuddered. She took a deep breath and began to turn her head in panic. Tim, where is my baby? Where is he?" "Quiet, calm down, he's okay. You saved him, he's alive." "Do you hear me? He's alive." Taylor gently held Lori in place so she wouldn't make things worse with a careless move. Finally, the young mother saw the baby and came to her senses a little. She reached out her arms to Tim, but she was so weak that she couldn't hold him. "Rest. You've been badly battered, but you'll live. He bit your neck deep. I've treated the wound. The bleeding should stop. I'd like to stitch it up, but I have nothing to stitch it with, and I don't know how. You need rest now. Did anyone else get in here besides him?" Rob kicked the motionless Dew in the fat side. "I don't know, probably not. He killed Olya. I never saw anyone else," Lori replied, sobbing. "Elon will keep an eye on you, and I'll go barricade the entrance so that no other creature can get in." Taylor left, leaving the 3 of them alone. The baby, his eyes red from crying, stared silently at his mother, who had sacrificed her life to save him. He was so hoarse he could no longer cry, and only wheezed faintly in Elon's arms. But Lori, on the contrary, burst into tears as soon as she recovered a little from the shock. "He killed them all. First Hector, then Olga. She tried to save us, but it all happened so fast.
I didn't have time to help her. And then Rob returned, saw the crying girl and carefully stroked her head. You can't change the past. You and the baby are alive. You have to keep fighting. You need to take care of yourself now for the baby's sake. That evening, as deep twilight descended on Tweed Heads, 4 people emerged from the fitness club. Laurie's wounds were bandaged, and the bleeding stopped. She regained some strength and was able to walk on her own. An hour later, the fugitives reached their new refuge. Finally, this long day, during which they had lost half their friends, was over. Chapter 70. Father and Son. Lev Nikolaevich, Fyodor, and Boris slowly made their way through the underground tunnel that led to the shelter's entrance. RoboCop walked slightly behind, grumbling. The country remains a mess, just as it was before. Even in the secret government shelter, the slobs can't even close the hatch. The president was so excited that he ignored his words, and the Cossack hissed at his friend in displeasure. Quiet down, don't jinx it. Maybe there's a reason all this is happening. Kornilov stopped. You need to leave. This could be a trap. Fedya, you have a family. Borya, you don't need to risk your life either. Go upstairs and wait by the car. Well, you're making this up, the Cossack said, offended, and looked sullenly at the president from under his thick gray eyebrows. We went in together, and we'll come out together. Go ahead, show the way, the border guard added, and spat at his feet. There was only one road, and it led to a gray steel door. Lev Nikolaevich crossed himself, pulled it toward him, and it obediently opened.
This is the entrance to the buffer zone. It's always locked. Something's not right here. It's like we're walking into a bear's mouth, Kornilov said, stopping hesitantly. There was a hissing sound, and the air seemed to be filled with white, cold steam. What the hell? The Cossack tensed up. Everything's fine. The sensors are working. The sterilization system is on. We're trying to make sure we don't accidentally bring in any infection, the president reassured his friends. RoboCop pointed to the barely noticeable dark spots. Look, there's blood on the floor. You think it's blood? Fyodor crouched down to take a closer look. Yeah, it looks like it. Is that good or bad? Thoughts, one more alarming than the other, raced through Lev Nikolaevich's head. How many executions had Chernov carried out during his absence? But there was no need to panic. They were almost there. This is the sanitary corridor, the disinfection zone, and that door over there leads into the bunker itself. So, shall we go? No, we'll spend the night here. It's getting late. It's inconvenient to visit at this hour. We'll drop by in the morning. Of course, let's go. Come on, Nikolaich. Open the door and I'll cover it. Fyodor rested the butt of his rifle on his shoulder and narrowed one eye. Kornilov pulled the manual release lever. A dull hum of mechanisms erupted, and the large, heavy hatch slid open. The friends aimed their guns at the empty opening. No one appeared or fired at them. The shelter was deathly silent, as if everyone had abandoned it. The trio emerged from the buffer zone and began slowly advancing down the bunker's corridor. The president heard a noise like a hubbub of voices. There's definitely someone in the medical wing. There's a central hall further on. It's best to go around it. The men took a few more steps when suddenly the alarm went off. The entire corridor began flashing red, and a nasty siren began to blare. Well, I'm caught. I won't give in to them for free, said Boris, pressing himself against the wall. Retreat, back into the tunnel, Lev Nikolaevich shouted. But at that moment 2 armed men appeared from behind a side corridor. Stop. Drop your weapons. On the floor, came the loud commands in trembling voices. Stop. It's me. Kornilov raised his hands and looked at the two engineers in surprise, although he had expected to see Chernov's men standing before him. Ah! Lev Nikolaevich! Yevgeny Kalmykov cried joyfully. He ran up to the president as if he were a family member and, smiling, began shaking his hand. What happened here? Your escape hatch is wide open, Kornilov asked, realizing things were starting to improve. Really? We forgot about him in all this chaos. We'll batten it down now. Everything's turned upside down here. Chernov and his gang got into a fight today, and now they're shooting at each other. The 10th one is dead. We finished off the rest. And where is Chernov himself? Nowhere. He ran away, the second engineer shrugged. It seems he and Matveyev had a falling out, and that's how their power ended. What's wrong with Peter? Everything is fine. Let's go to the others. Why are we standing here? Kalmykov waved his hand, as if he was talking not to the president, but to an old friend. A few minutes later, the bunker's inhabitants joyfully surrounded Lev Nikolaevich, Boris, and Fyodor. Everyone vied with each other to recount what had happened during his absence, complaining about the atrocities of Chernov's gang and rejoicing at the rebels' disappearance. Kornilov stood happily, looking at familiar faces and hugging his son. They peppered him with questions about life on the outside, and the president spoke at length about his experiences during that time. So, the disease is over? No one else is getting infected? Asked Milana, the daughter of the deceased General Kornilov, hopefully. I don't know. I'm still healthy.
My new friends are too. But we've seen a lot of zombies. And where's Zakhar Evgenovich? The president asked, looking around at everyone gathered. After your expulsion, he suffered another attack. He's now in stable but serious condition, reported Elena Vasilyevna Malishkina. I want to visit him. Lev Nikolaevich asked for permission. Of course, the head of medical services agreed graciously. By the way, I have good news. Chernov brought air samples from the surface today. We analyzed them and found no traces of the virus, Malishkina added. Has the air cleared up? Can we return to normal life? Kalmykov began biting his nails in excitement. But Elena Vasilyevna dampened his optimism. It's too early to draw such conclusions. We need to continue taking samples for at least several months. No one wanted to leave the safety of the bunker right now, and everyone began to beg Kornilov to return back to the shelter. No, my place is there now. I'm glad Chernov's no longer here, although that won't bring back the dead. But at least you'll be able to live as before. We need to figure out how to establish communication between the bunker and the village. Maybe we can establish a radio link. By the way, what were you saying about the freezing units? What broke down there? Nothing broke. Kalmykov smiled slyly. The guys and I were just trying to score some points, so to speak. We disconnected one module and said the refrigeration unit was broken. We would have fixed it later, of course, to show how essential we were. Otherwise, we were afraid they'd shoot us down for being useless. We didn't expect it to turn out this way, and for them to end up fighting among themselves. It's all for the best. Okay, the main thing is, none of our guys were hurt. Okay, well, time to head back. We'll grab a couple of machine guns. You won't need them much, but we'll definitely need them more than once on the surface. Who's in charge now? Asked Elena Vasilyevna Malishkina, surprised by the president's desire to leave the shelter. Well, you decide for yourself, Kornilov smiled. The ancients said that true democracy is only possible in a small community where everyone knows everyone else. You've already lived through despotism. Now try building democracy. They left the bunker the same way they'd come, through the emergency exit. Fyodor drove leisurely toward the village. Boris sat next to him, cheerfully whistling a tune from an old film.
Lev Nikolaevich and Pyotr chatted in the back seat. Kornilov hesitated about taking his son with him to the surface, but his intuition told him it was best not to be separated from him. Everyone was happy that the day had ended so well. As they approached Dalny, the president looked thoughtfully out the window, wondering where Chernov might have gone. As long as the former advisor remained alive, any trouble could be expected from him. Chapter 71. The Deal. Ivan settled comfortably into the driver's seat, one hand on the steering wheel and the other elbow deep out the window. But despite his outwardly relaxed posture, the cosmonaut was completely focused on the road. A recent experience had taught his friends that trouble can lurk behind every bush. The truck was traveling at no more than 80 kilometers per hour, the optimal balance between speed and engine speed, and therefore the consumption of precious fuel. But no matter how hard Vorobyov tried to conserve fuel, the indicator soon turned red. Stopping in the middle of an empty highway seemed like an unlikely option, but the friends trusted in their stars, and luck smiled on them. A gas station sign appeared around the next bend. The car was already moving almost at full speed. Ivan turned off the engine, and the truck stopped 200 meters before the gas station exit. Andrei quickly jumped out of the cab and began making his way along the shoulder. About 10 minutes later, the cosmonaut's radio hissed. "It's quiet here. I see a one-story building, small, without a store," Kuznetsov's voice said quietly. "It used to be an automatic gas station, self-service." "Wait," someone flashed in the window. "There's life on Mars." "Don't come any closer yet, I'll keep an eye on you." Another 15 minutes passed, and Andrei returned to the air with a new report. A guy came out, armed with a shovel. He took a leak in the bushes and went back. "I don't know how many there were inside, but it's unlikely that more than 3 or 4 people could fit in that booth. We need to go." "How's your view? Can you block it?" "It's a bit far. I can scare them from behind the trees, but I doubt I'll be able to shoot accurately." "Okay, nothing ventured, let's go." The truck roared to life, slowly turned into the gas station area, and stopped near a lone diesel fuel pump. The door to the building immediately opened, and 2 men tumbled out. They appeared to be around 40, of average height, with round faces, narrow eyes, and dark skin. The first stranger was dressed in blue denim overalls and a green cap with a hockey team logo. He held a pistol, but Ivan couldn't tell from the car whether it was a firearm or a non-lethal weapon. The second man stood unarmed, wearing a red torn t-shirt and black shorts. "Look, they look like twins," Ivan chuckled, not taking his eyes off the gas station's owners. "Exactly. I can't tell them apart either," Max agreed. The boys turned off the car and climbed out. Vorobyov held the sawed-off shotgun down, and Sova, as a bluff, decided to arm himself with his father's pistol, which had long since run out of bullets. "Hello, need some gas?" asked the man in the green cap. The cosmonaut detected a slight nervousness in his voice. It was clear that the strangers were worried, which was a good sign. "Yes, can you fill the tank completely?" "We can, but how will you pay?" The second twin in the red t-shirt spoke up. "What currency do you value? Dollars, euros, pounds, yuan?" Ivan smiled broadly, trying to ease the tension with a joke. "The traditional currency in use now is gold. You can also buy weapons, ammunition, food, and other useful items." The man in the cap answered judiciously. Vorobyov nodded. "Let's agree. First show me that you have diesel fuel." Otherwise, the gas station might be empty. Follow me, just the two of us, agreed the owner of the gas station with a pistol. In the technical area, he opened one of the hatches and gestured for the client to look inside. The cosmonaut felt the pungent smell of diesel fuel hit his nose. There's at least half a tank left here. Don't worry, you'll have enough. How are you going to download it? Everything's out of power, isn't it? Ivan asked. I've been servicing these gas stations for 15 years. Don't worry, I have everything you need. The main thing is that you have the money to pay. My name is Yusuf, by the way. The man extended his sinewy hand. Ivan, Vorobyov introduced himself, feeling a firm handshake. Well, let's go, Yusuf, to negotiate. The men returned to the car. Katya, Masha, and Lena had already climbed out of the back. The other twin eyed the girls with undisguised curiosity, lightly biting his lower lip. Max noticed this and scowled at the stranger. Vorobyov opened the truck door wide and waved his hand in a proprietary manner, pointing to the boxes. This is what we have for barter. After about 10 minutes of inspection, the gas station attendant shrugged his shoulders indifferently. I don't even know. Fuel is worth its weight in gold these days, and you have all sorts of consumer goods here. Who are you going to sell your fuel to? Do cars often drive past you, especially with diesel engines? The cosmonaut shrugged. Often. Not often, but they drive. And here for hundreds of kilometers around here, the only place you can get fuel is from us. Okay. Katya, give me the box. Ivan took the case from the girl, opened it, and handed the gas station attendant a chain with a pendant. This one used to cost about 70,000, Lizitsina added coquettishly. Good enough, Yusuf muttered and handed the gold to his brother. We'll also take this set of tools, clothes, and those 3 boxes. Vorobyov slightly grimaced, pretending not to be delighted with such a deal, but then waved his hand. Okay, take it. I don't like haggling. Just fill it up to the top. And fill this canister too. 20 minutes later, everything was done. The girls quickly jumped into the back of the truck. The guys said goodbye to the gas station attendants and headed out onto the highway. Aren't you forgetting anyone by any chance? Kuznetsov's tense voice came from the radio lying between the seats. We remember. It's a conspiracy. Wait by the side of the road, right where you got out, Ivan replied, glancing cheerfully at the fuel gauge. The truck turned around, picked up Andrei, turned around again, and headed west. The twins watched these maneuvers from their vantage point with disbelief. When the truck disappeared, Yusuf sighed and turned to his brother. Ayaz, we also need to leave in the fall. The road is almost deserted, nothing but zombies roaming around. What about abandoning the gas station? The twin brother's voice was filled with melancholy, uncertainty, fear, and anger. We'll trade some more, but we won't last long here this winter. By the way, go to the warehouses and exchange the gold for a machine gun, some stew, and some pasta. The gas station attendants returned to the building, and the truck, its engine rumbling busily, carried the friends further away. The deal was a win-win for everyone. Chapter 72. Riddles. The truck drove about 10 kilometers from the gas station. Andrei looked in the rearview mirror and said, Listen, do you think those two in the chest look identical? And do they handle the gas station themselves? Even we could have killed them if we wanted. They're a real juicy target. Hasn't anyone tried to snatch them up? Maybe he's not as appealing as he seems. We've been driving for a while now and haven't seen a single car on the highway. Maybe if any of the locals survived, they're stopping by, Ivan said, slowing down before another pothole and swerving slightly into the oncoming lane. The scientist, out of boredom, punched the ceiling of the cabin. We mostly traveled at night on the monster. Maybe there's some traffic during the day. We'll see today. We're currently between Chelyabinsk and Ufa, as far as I understand. Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, it's still about 600 to 700 kilometers to Samara. It's a shame there's no GPS here. It was handy at RGR. While the guys chatted in the cab, the others tried to amuse themselves somehow in the dark back of the truck. Lena tucked her legs under her and leaned her elbows on the box. Maybe we should play cities. Oh no, this is giving me a headache. After 5 minutes, I'm already confused about what was said and what wasn't, Katya groaned. Tell them some jokes, Max suggested from the other corner. Masha turned over onto her other side and asked curiously, "What should I wish for?" "Didn't you play at camp?" Lena smiled in the darkness. "I don't remember anything like that, and I didn't go to camp." Lizitsina closed her eyes and twirled her bronze curls around her index finger. "And me," Masha added. "Okay, so I'll tell you a story, and you have to guess the reason. You ask questions, and I'll only answer yes, no, or it doesn't matter." "Okay, that's good," the girls agreed. Lena recalled the condition for a few seconds, and then began to tell. An exam at a military academy. A cadet takes his exam paper and goes to study. A strange knocking sound is heard in the classroom, but no one pays attention. A few minutes later, one of the cadets approaches the instructor. The instructor, without asking any questions, gives him an A, and the cadet happily leaves the room. Why did this happen? A bribe? Masha immediately assumed. No. Are they related? The redhead asked. No. So, maybe he just has a machine gun. Or did you draw a lucky ticket? No and no, Lena answered categorically. Think broader, remember the conditions. Max advised in the tone of an expert who knows the answer. So, it's the knocking that's the problem. It's some kind of clue, Lizitsina began to think. Does the school have to be military? Yes, Lena said unequivocally. Who was that knocking? Vorobyova tried to pry out new information. Well, guess for yourself or ask. Student? No. Teacher? Yes. After Lena's answer, the girls fell silent for a moment, pondering their hypotheses. Another 10 minutes passed, and the friends peppered Lena with questions, but they still couldn't find the right answer. So, are you giving up? Okay, I'll tell you. The teacher was scribbling in Morse code on the desk with a pencil. Whoever needs an A, come on over, I'll give you one. Only one student, warlike and alert, noticed the teacher's coded message. That's why he got an A. That's a cool game. More fun than cities. Let's play another story. We'll get it right the second time, Katya asked, wanting to get even. Can I make a wish? Max suggested. It's right on topic with what's happening now. What are you talking about? The sister didn't immediately understand. You'll understand now. Listen. Once upon a time, there was land there. There were people. There was goodness. But then it all disappeared. There was a pause. Then Masha remarked ironically, Yes, Max. Right on topic. You know how to lift the spirits and cheer people up. Come on, are you going to guess? The guy chuckled. Okay, is this Atlantis? Katya suggested uncertainly. No, Max answered, stretching. Disappeared as a result of a cataclysm? Nope. Is this a biblical story? No, religion has nothing to do with it. Was it a long time ago? Yes. How long ago? Ask more specifically. I can only answer yes, no, and it doesn't matter. Owl reminded him of the rules. Before our era? No. Was it in our part of the world? Was it on Earth? Yes. Is this a real event, a historical one? Yes, sure. Is this about the Indians in America? Aha, ha. No, Masha, no. But I liked the way you thought about it. Okay, is this related to the war? Lizitsina asked, trying to find the answer. No. Maybe this is about the Titanic. Oh, wow. That's an interesting version, but again, no. 20 minutes flew by. The girls fired off dozens of questions, and Max, like a robot, answered no and very rarely yes. Lena smiled quietly in the corner, knowing the answer, listening to her friend's rage in the darkness. Okay, Max, my head's already hurting worse than the city's. What's the answer? Katya groaned, unable to think any longer. No, wait. Masha did not give up. It was in Russia, right? Yes, I already said. Is this the Tatar-Mongol yoke? Nice try, but no. But this happened around the same time? Max thought for a moment and answered a little hesitantly. Roughly, yes. But before that, this is my last hint. Wait, I remember something like that from history, like Az, Buki, Vedi, something else, and the letter D. Good. There was a quiet round of applause from Lena's corner. Hooray, finally. Max exhaled and explained in more detail. It's Cyrillic. There were these guys, Cyril and Methodius, who invented the old Slavonic alphabet, and each letter had a corresponding word, like in the alphabet today. A, for example, means watermelon, and so on. Z stands for earth, L stands for people, D stands for good. Those are the letters of the Cyrillic alphabet. But then the alphabet was reworked and all that disappeared. Well, we already know that. Damn. How could I not have guessed? And I also wanted to go into journalism, Lizitsina said, angry with herself and sulking in her corner. Suddenly, everyone in the back felt the car begin to slow, and a few moments later, it stopped. They heard the sound of a deadbolt being released. Then, the door swung open. The friends squinted against the harsh light and heard Andre's voice. Gang, get out. We're going to make some clever dinner. Chapter 73. Logging. The next morning after his conversation with Berkut, the professor was awakened very early. Dr. Makarich came into Albert Borisovich's house, examined him, and unfastened his handcuffs. Wake up. It's customary for us to start the workday at dawn. In half an hour, you'll be heading out to the logging site with the men. They're already serving breakfast in the canteen. Here are your clothes. The women have washed and mended them. We can't spare a new suit right now. There's no supermarket nearby. Kayumovich rubbed his eyes with difficulty, rose from his bed, got dressed, and left the infirmary. Berkut's words about rain from the previous day were already coming true. A light drizzle was falling outside. The scientist winced from the unpleasant wind and looked around in confusion. If Albert Borisovich were asked to name the worst morning of his life, this one would very well be a contender. Work was already in full swing in the village. Two men passed a professor with bundles of firewood, indifferently. A fat, sullen woman was lugging two large buckets of water. A toothless, red-nosed old man was trying unsuccessfully to start an old tractor. Gray smoke rose from the chimneys, almost blending with the sky. A tall, sturdy fence made of freshly cut logs and scrap lumber surrounded the entire village. Albert Borisovich didn't immediately figure out where the common dining hall was. He asked a passing young man in a torn striped shirt, and the man pointed to a one-story log house with a black, sloping roof. The professor walked faster, opened the door, and found himself in a large room, lit only by the dim morning light from the windows. In the center stood several tables, chairs, and crudely constructed benches. About 20 people were eating hurriedly, their expressions sullen. The air smelled of sour cabbage soup and garlic. Suddenly, Kaimovich spotted Tanya, who was clearing dirty dishes from one of the tables. The scientist quickly approached the girl and took her hand. "Hello. Have they let you go? Are we leaving?" The little girl rejoiced. But the mentor immediately hissed at her and began to speak in a whisper. "Shh, quiet. No, we're like prisoners here. They're watching us. No one can know we want to escape. But I'll figure out how to get out. And don't call me you, call me Daddy, if you don't mind. That's what needs to happen now." The girl sighed sadly and pursed her lips. "I thought so. They don't want to let us go." Albert Borisovich glanced cautiously at the people at the nearest table. "You haven't eaten, have you?" "Oh, you haven't eaten. Dad, come with me." Tanya led her mentor into another room, which served as a kitchen. The professor silently obeyed and followed. "Baba Zina, give me another portion."
Please?
The little girl asked modestly, looking at her father. The hunchbacked old woman raised her head and, looking at the scientist with displeasure, muttered, "Has your dad deigned to get up? Come on, eat. There's nothing else left." She handed over a plate of thin oatmeal, 2 pieces of bread, and unsweetened tea, with currant and rowan leaves floating in it instead of tea leaves. "Thank you," the scientist answered briefly, took his breakfast and went to the dining room. A few minutes later, Albert Borisovich finished the disgusting porridge, washing it down with some bland homemade bread. The tea turned out to be the most delicious part of the breakfast. The professor wanted to chat with Tanya some more, but the old woman sent her away from the dining room. Kaimovich went outside and was immediately hailed by a red-haired, bearded man with one arm. A pistol holster was slung over his shoulder. "Oh, Albert, you're Albert, right? You're coming with us today," the one-armed man said, striding quickly toward the truck near the gate. The scientist immediately recognized the red-haired man who'd come in yesterday with Berkut and Makarik. "That means he's not the least important person here. He's obviously part of the main guy's inner circle," the professor noted to himself. "You recovered quickly. You're a survivor. When we picked you up with the girl on the road, we thought you were a goner," the big guy boomed, glancing cheerfully around. "I thought the same thing, to be honest, before I passed out. I just wanted Tanya and Dodge to run away." "Thanks for keeping us awake," Albert Borisovich replied, trying to keep up with his new acquaintance. "And what's your name?" "My name is Vitya, but you can call me Buck. Almost everyone here has nicknames. Do I have one yet?" the scientist asked, adjusting his glasses as he walked, which had miraculously survived the fight with the infected. "Not yet, but we will."
Don't worry about that. We have highly qualified specialists here who can craft nicknames.
"I'll introduce you to one right now. Buck,
and Haimovich approached the car. Two men stood near the truck. The first, a man of average height with a huge shock of thick curly hair. And the second, a stocky Caucasian man with a beard that reached almost to his eyes. "Meet our risen from the dead. Berkut told us to bring him along. He'll be coming with us." Albert, the professor, was the first to extend his hand. Pushkin, the curly-haired man, introduced himself and winked at Haimovich. "And this is Shapi. He's mute. He doesn't speak, but he hears and understands you," the one-armed man explained, clapping the Caucasian on the shoulder. After a short introduction, Pushkin climbed into the passenger seat. Shapi sat in as the driver, and Bach and Albert Borisovich climbed into the back. The car shuddered, rattled, slowly pulled out of the gate, and rolled leisurely down the road. About 10 minutes later, the truck slowed down and turned into a narrow clearing. Tree branches began scraping against the truck as it drove deeper into the forest. Soon, the brakes screeched and Shapi turned off the engine. But no one was in a hurry to leave the truck. The one-armed man pulled out a pistol and peered carefully into the surrounding trees. They also surveyed the area from the cab. Only after making sure there was no one nearby did the men get out. "Let's scout out the situation. You take the right, we'll take the left. Walk 200 meters from the car and back," Buck confidently directed the others. The professor realized that in their hierarchy he ranked at least slightly above Pushkin and Shapi. There were no infected people nearby. And soon the men set to work. Shapi began chopping down a dead tree with a massive axe. When it fell, Pushkin quickly cut off the branches and began hauling them into a separate pile. Then, Buck and Albert Borisovich began sawing the trunk in half. The professor watched in amazement at the red-bearded man's dexterity with one hand. After half an hour of intense work, Haimovich felt his lower back twitching. But that was only the beginning. Buck announced that their shift would last the entire day and, to save fuel, they would not return to the village for lunch. They would make do with packed rations. The men worked leisurely, taking breaks, and gradually Albert Borisovich got the hang of it. Finally, it was time for lunch, and most importantly, rest. Shapi lit a small fire to boil tea. Bach took groceries from his bag, and Pushkin went to take a leak. The professor sat down on a freshly cut aspen and began wiping his fogged-up glasses. "Take care of your lenses. We'll run out of matches. We'll use them to light a fire." The curly-haired man came out from behind the trees, wiping his hands on his pants. The one-armed man chuckled and added, "By the way, I'm not too worried about the matches. I have something to replace them with. But we'll definitely run out of fuel soon. We don't have any oil here. The DVs will just sit there like dead weight. Well, the electric ones will run for a while. But how long do the batteries last? 5, 10 years? Well, no more. We still have to live for these 5 or 10 years. Surviving the first winter here will be a blessing." Pushkin scratched his dirty, curly head. "We need horses." Haimovich, who had been silent until then, suddenly chimed in. "Horses are the future, as strange as it may sound. Our generation will definitely spend its entire life riding horses." Shapi raised his head and gave the professor a thumbs up. Buck swatted a mosquito on his neck and said, "We didn't find any horses here. The locals said there were a few. But either they were eaten or they ran away. We need to go further, to other villages. I told Berkut, but he doesn't want to burn diesel fuel." "Did you and Berkut come here together?" Albert Borisovich asked casually. "We all came with him, sat together," Pushkin answered and spat at his feet. "And where are you from?" "We are from Novosibirsk." "Why did you go so far?"
We just wanted to get away from the big cities. We were looking for a suitable place in the wilderness to spend the winter, Albert Borisovich explained vaguely. Pushkin yawned, opening his mouth wide, missing a couple of teeth. Aha, well, you found this place, the most suitable one. Yes, you're great. It's nice and safe here, and my daughter likes it. The scientist lied with an honest face. After lunch, the men worked for a few more hours, loaded a truck full of firewood, and set off on the return journey. Buck and Kaimovich sat on the logs, bouncing on every bump. Well, is it difficult to get used to it? The one-armed man grinned, looking at the professor, who was as tired as a dog. It's true, my back hurts. Albert Borisovich did not argue. It's okay, you'll get used to it. Work heals. Kaimovich had no intention of getting used to this or enduring this treatment for long. He carefully plotted his escape. But this would require time to get to know the locals better, learn their routines, and identify their weaknesses. For now, he held onto a branch to keep from falling out of the truck. Chapter 74. Life is Pain. Chernov struggled down the mountain, overcoming the pain in his hip. After emerging from the bunker, he found a small shelter, bandaged his wound, and gathered his strength. The bullet had passed through, damaging only the skin and muscle. The bone and tendon remained intact. But to the former presidential advisor, the pain felt as intense as if his leg had been torn off. After the bleeding stopped, Alexander descended to the foot of the mountain and began to ponder which way to go next. The air was stuffy, a harbinger of an approaching storm. Chernov looked around in confusion, unsure of where to go or what to do next.
His hand clutched a pistol, and an automatic rifle slung over his shoulder. But the weapon didn't inspire confidence in the fugitive. After catching his breath and examining his wounded thigh again, Alexander chose the opposite direction from where Lev Nikolaevich had headed after his exile. Their paths diverged again. A couple of hours later, the former junta leader began to feel thirsty, but there was no fresh water to be found. The wounded man decided to cross the field, but halfway across, his legs began to weaken, and he lay down to rest in the shade of a lone tree. I need to get to the coast. When the wound heals, I'll find a boat and sail away from here. I'll fish, raise cattle, build a hut. Chernov dreamed of a new life, looking at the thin, cirrus clouds high in the sky. Then he saw an eagle soaring above the ground and hovered on it. Suddenly, Alexander's dreams gave way to a longing for refuge. Life there had been so stable and safe, especially during the time of Leo Tolstoy. The fugitive felt sick, weak, pathetic, petty, and insignificant in this vast, empty world. No one was waiting for him. No one loved him. Now, all he saw were danger and death. At the same time, it seemed as if the epidemic, the contagion, and the cannibals had remained far away in Moscow. Everything here was so quiet, calm, and beautiful that it was hard to imagine zombies in these parts. Chernov recalled the mounds of smoking corpses on the streets of the capital, the reports of crowds of infected people from other cities, and tried to convince himself that the epidemic had been there, in the cities, and here, in this natural environment. Everything was different. Everything was fine. The sun's rays played merrily through the foliage. The soft chirping of birds could be heard somewhere in the distance, and even the pain in his hip began to subside. All that was needed to complete his happiness was a bottle of clean, cool water. Alexander stretched out under a tree, closed his eyes, relaxed, and without realizing it, drifted off. He slept peacefully for almost 2 hours, and when he awoke, he didn't immediately realize where he was. The mutiny, the shooting, Number 10's corpse, the escape. It all seemed like a dream. Returning to reality, Chernov felt something biting his hand. He noticed a large black ant burrowing into the skin between his middle and index fingers. The wounded man shook the insect off, and then it dawned on him. He stood up and began carefully examining the area around him. Finally, about 10 paces away, Alexander spotted an anthill. A black mound of earth, small branches, and straw seemed alive. Busy insects crawled over it ceaselessly. From the outside, it might have seemed like complete chaos reigned within the anthill. But this was not the case. Each ant knew its task and carried it out precisely. Chernov placed his palm on the anthill, and several insects immediately crawled onto it. The fugitive quickly devoured them and tasted a faint sour taste. This only whetted his appetite, and Alexander began greedily collecting and swallowing the ants. Then he dug into the anthill and discovered a clutch of white eggs laid by the queen. She was crawling around in a panic, trying to save her brood, while hundreds of worker ants scurried like bullets, trying to restore the ruined nest. The former presidential advisor carefully scooped up the entire clutch with his palms, blew away the dirt, and quickly swallowed his prey. Soon, almost nothing remained of the anthill. The last surviving insects crawling across the grass. Alexander dusted his palms, wiped his mouth, and rose to his feet. But what he saw caused the man to instantly collapse onto his stomach. A few bodies were moving about 100 meters ahead, and a huge crowd of infected followed them a little further away. Where Chernov lay, the grass grew waist-high, temporarily concealing him. But Alexander knew he had to run, and one of his legs was failing him. The wounded man crawled on his belly, trying to escape the advance guard of cannibals. Chernov cursed angrily, cursing his carelessness. If not for sleep and the ant-eating, he would have noticed the danger from afar. Every movement sent pain through his thigh, and the wound he had reopened began to bleed again. The man rose slightly and looked at the approaching enemies. The zombies were spread out in a wide front across the entire field. It was difficult to count their numbers, but Alexander imagined there were several thousand of them. His weapon was useless against such an army of cannibals, only slowing him down. The zombies couldn't see the man, but they moved forward with a confident and cheerful pace, as if they knew their destination and wanted to reach it as quickly as possible. The distance between them and Chernov was closing. Alexander took his machine gun off safety and aimed at the nearest infected. A single shot rang out, the first bullet flying just above the cannibal's crown. The wounded man winced in frustration and lowered his aim. The second round hit the infected in the throat and he collapsed to the ground. The zombies heard the gunshots and paused for a moment. Chernov wasted no time, firing at the stationary targets near him. He was trying to gain distance by killing the cannibals closest to him, hoping to outrun those in the distance. The machine gun clicked blankly, the ammo running out. The man dropped the weapon and ran as fast as he could. His body mobilized all its strength. At first, Alexander even forgot about the pain and ran as if the wound had never existed. But gradually he began to limp, and with each passing second putting weight on his injured leg became increasingly difficult. The infected quickly spotted their prey and the pursuit began. At first, the distance between man and zombie increased, but soon the wounded man began to slow. Chernov knew he was doomed. He felt they would catch up and tear him apart alive. 300 meters, 200, 100. The distance rapidly closed. The closer the cannibals got to their prey, the faster they seemed to run. Ahead lay a field, dotted with sparse, thin trees. Even if the former advisor had managed to climb one of them, it would only have delayed his death. After a few minutes, Alexander slowed to a walk and turned around. His closest pursuers were no more than 50 meters away. Suddenly, the man tripped over a clump of ants and fell to one knee. The wounded man groaned but found the strength to rise. He clutched a pistol in his right hand, ready to solve all his problems with a single shot. Out of the corner of his eye, Chernov spotted a huge boulder off to the side, seemingly somehow ending up in the middle of the field. Perhaps it had been dragged here by a glacier millions of years ago. Or perhaps it was a remnant of the ancient mountains that once towered over this area. "There's the monument," flashed through the fugitive's mind. And he headed toward the large stone. When the man's hands touched the boulder, the three infected were practically breathing down his neck. Alexander placed his healthy foot on a small ledge, dug his fingers into the indentations in the stone, and, gritting his teeth, pulled himself up. He almost reached the horizontal platform a couple of meters above the ground, but at that moment, one of the cannibals grabbed Chernov by his injured leg. The cannibal's teeth sank into his shin, drawing blood. A piercing scream rang out, and moments later, 3 shots rang out. The fugitive had fired at point-blank range and was no longer missing from this distance. The starving trio collapsed dead at the foot of the boulder, and Chernov managed to climb to the very top before the main force of his pursuers arrived. The rock was firmly embedded in the soil and rose almost 4 meters above the ground. At its summit was a relatively flat surface where a person could sit or even lie down. Hundreds of individuals surrounded the boulder. Some wheezed angrily and stretched out their bony hands with blackened nails toward it. Others hesitantly shuffled around at a distance, their minds vaguely aware that prey was scarce and they needed to move on. Alexander stared ahead, detached. From above, the zombie army seemed even more numerous. The rock he sat on resembled a small, uninhabited island amid a sea of angry, hungry, and ferocious cannibals. After a while, the bulk of the infected lost patience and moved on, but several hundred cannibals continued their siege. The former rebel leader no longer paid attention to the infected. After the bite, his thirst became even more intense. The wound on his leg, left by the zombie's teeth, was shallow. It didn't even require bandaging. The blood quickly clotted. But the bite site itched and stung intensely, like a nettle sting. Chernov sat, lay, and tossed and turned, his muscles quickly tiring on the hard surface. Finally, he rose, spread his arms wide, and shouted loudly, "Hey, tribe of freaks! Well, here I am. Get up and devour me. You can't? Because you are all clumsy creatures. I don't give a damn about you. I still have a few bullets, but one is enough for me. Bang, and no problem. But it won't be today. Look at the sunset. You stupid animals can't appreciate its beauty. The sun, like a red-hot core, burns through the earth, plunging into it deeper and deeper. This is the most beautiful thing I've seen in my life. I want to savor this moment. And tomorrow, it will all end. This is my last evening, and I'm not afraid of death." After these words, the former presidential advisor lowered his pants and urinated on his opponents. The infected remained motionless, grinning hungrily, continuing to watch their unreachable prey. Having relieved himself, Chernov sat up, placed his pistol next to him, and watched with a blissful expression as the sun set over the horizon.
Soon it grew dark, and the first dim stars appeared in the sky. Alexander lay on his back, his hands tucked under his head. He recalled his life, and long-forgotten childhood images suddenly and unexpectedly vividly surfaced in his mind. Slowly and deliberately, he reviewed each passing year. His parents, his first friends, kindergarten, school, university, work. Imperceptibly, the calendar of his mind scrolled down to this day. Just that morning, Chernov had been sitting in a safe shelter, and even in his worst nightmares he couldn't have imagined how quickly everything would change. At the foot of the boulder, the quiet grumbling of sleeping zombies could be heard. Alexander looked down, assessing his chances of escape. But the cannibals were so densely packed that he wouldn't be able to sneak through unnoticed. Even a healthy man couldn't break through their ranks, let alone a wounded one. Chernov fell asleep surprisingly quickly, but his sleep was restless. He woke frequently during the night, groaning and tossing and turning, trying to get comfortable. It was hardly pleasant to sleep on the rough stone, which by midnight had also become cold. The former advisor woke up around 6 in the morning and discovered to his horror that the pistol was gone. He'd accidentally pushed it down during the night, and the weapon now lay at the feet of the infected. Despair overwhelmed him. The only option left was to jump into the hands of the cannibals. But that path was far more painful than putting a bullet to his temple. Alexander couldn't bring himself to take it. By midday, the first symptoms of fever set in. Chills, a rising temperature, and dizziness. Suddenly, he felt a powerful desire to live no matter the cost. Even with wounded legs, arms, whatever, the main thing was to live.
The rebel leader rolled over onto his stomach and clutched the rocky outcroppings with his hands.
He was afraid of losing consciousness and falling. Chernov was certain he would be saved, that he would surely pull through, as had happened many times before. True, he had never come so close to death before, but some inner feeling compelled him to fight fate. Alexander no longer shouted at the zombies, didn't get up, didn't attract attention. He tried to blend into the boulder so that his enemies would forget about him. Besieged on all sides, the man desperately plotted his escape. He tried to convince himself that all was not yet lost, searching for that cherished straw he could grasp and pull himself out of this predicament. Chernov dreamed that the cannibals would forget about his existence and leave. They would be drawn to another victim, or a helicopter would fly over the field, spot him, and rescue him. The idea of a helicopter, despite its fantastical nature, somehow remained particularly ingrained in the wounded man's mind. But the infected continued to crowd tightly around the boulder, watching for their prey, and besides the eagle, no one appeared in the sky. After lunch, Alexander was completely exhausted from the heat, thirst, hunger, and fatigue. From time to time he lost consciousness, drifted off into unconsciousness, talked to himself, and thrashed about in fits and starts, miraculously avoiding collapsing. By evening, his body temperature had risen to 40 degrees Celsius, and he was no longer his own man. The Nova was methodically and inexorably doing its work.